Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Members, we are prepared to begin the October 14th meeting of the Homelessness and Poverty Committee. I'm joined by Council Members Price, my co-chair, Council Member Wisard, and Council Member Mike Bonin. So far, we expect a few more folks to come on board. We'll be discussing several issues crucial to the long-term success of reducing homelessness in the city of Los Angeles. As a committee, we're working hard to put together a robust plan that will tackle the short-term crisis in our city while thoughtfully crafting a long-term approach to reduce and prevent homelessness and support individuals and families during this time of crisis. In order to create the best plan possible with the highest likelihood of success, we want to take time to look at other issues surrounding homelessness by visiting local providers and aligning our timeline so that it is in coordination with the plan that Los Angeles County is developing. This means we're coordinating to align ourselves with their process, and we'll extend our time, our original timeline for the completion of the strategic plan from December to January of 2016. We have a handful of items on the agenda today, but I wanted to begin with general public comment because we have a few folks who needed to leave early, and so we want to do our best to accommodate them. So I'm going to call you up, and if you all can line up right away down the center aisle, we can get through this part of the meeting quickly and get on to some of the agenda items. I have Betsy Starman, Raquel Beard, Cindy Lopez, and Rose Park. Okay, good. Thank you. Coming up, you have 1 minute to speak after we remove our rope brigade. Ms. Starman?
Yes.
Let's go.
If I'm living on the street in Skid Row and someone brings me food 3 times a day, brings me clothing down on an average of once a day, and the dope man walks past me every hour, why would I move? I say this because I was this. I did this, and I didn't have to move. When we say yes to an addict, we kill them. When we say no, we save their lives. People had to stop enabling me. Please don't underestimate the power of the disease of addiction. It has more power than the love between a mother and her child. We need to stop killing our most vulnerable by enabling them, and we actually need to stop enabling them because we are keeping them from getting well. Please stop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Raquel Beard. I'm the Executive Director of the Downtown Industrial BID. I am accompanied today with several stakeholders in the Industrial District. I'm happy to be here. I'm here to talk about public safety because laws, litigation, and straight-out lies have pushed us so far to one side of this issue that the city has bought into this sham that public safety should not be a priority, and I completely disagree. My office was broken into at 4:30 p.m. during business hours with someone that looked like she had a .45 caliber handgun. Thank God it was a pellet gun, but that was too close for comfort. People are now coming inside of our buildings. I found an 8-year-old girl inside of a tent. She had been hidden there for 6 months on Crocker Street. This is out of control. The businesses are surrounded. We are under siege, and we need help sooner rather than later. We need some practical immediate solutions to this issue. Tents are being set on fire. Property is being damaged. Who pays for that? And my question is, do we matter? We should matter as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Cindy Lopez, and I manage a building, mixed-use property for the last 26 years. It's one of the first city-approved live-work buildings in downtown. I represent residential tenants and businesses, and we did not just move into downtown. Homelessness and poverty issues in our country and city are huge and affect us all. No one in America should be living in squalor on public sidewalks and suffering like they do. And no residents and businesses should be suffering from all the problems that occur from this. We're dealing with a huge health issue. Our tenants cannot walk to the corner store anymore for sidewalks being blocked. We have encampments. We keep our property clean. We try really hard. But right now we have trash blowing from mounds of trash from encampments exploding all around us, north, west, east, south, every which way. We step over feces, needles, syringes. We have homeless encampments filling up bags of feces and throwing them onto our property in our face every morning as we drive out of the building. We're just asking for support in every which way we can get it.
Hi, my name is Rose, and I'm speaking on behalf of my parents on Crocker Street. We're a business. Before I came here, or came to my parents' business 3 years ago, it wasn't as bad, but with all these, with the security guys' hands tied, with the cops' hands tied, it's been getting worse and worse, and the encampments are just out on the street, and there's too many people out there right now, and it's just a major health issue for all of us, and we can't even get out in and out of our building safely. Every day we have to, like, we can't even walk around or walk on our sidewalks safely. We have to walk around them to get to the other side of our other parking lot. And so I feel like we businesses have, like, you guys should consider businesses as well. I mean, we pay the taxes.
Thank you. So that'll conclude this section of general public comment. I do have more cards. We will call them later in the meeting, but we wanted to get folks in. Thank you. Get folks in towards the beginning of the meeting. Clerk, can we read item number 1 into the record?
Certainly, Council Member. Item number 1 is a City Administrative Officer report relative to the grant acceptance for the Homeless Court Clinic program. This item is also referred to the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee.
Thank you so much. Could we have representatives from the City Attorney and the Chief Administrator's Office to come to the table in the center and give us a brief explanation of this item and take questions from the committee members? We've been joined by the esteemed Mr. Gil Cedillo, also a member of this committee.
Good afternoon. Mara Legaspi with the Office of the CAO. The request before you is a request from the City Attorney's Office to accept $810,400 in grant funding from the County of Los Angeles for the Homeless Court Clinic program. The Homeless Court Clinic program helps homeless individuals or those at risk of homelessness resolve legal barriers on their way to self-sufficiency and security. According to the City Attorney's Office, a minimum of about 300 individuals will be serviced through the program in fiscal year 15-16. To achieve the objectives of the program, the City Attorney's Office is also requesting authority for 3 positions, including 1 Deputy City Attorney 2, 1 Administrative Coordinator 1, and 1 Legal Clerk 1. The City Attorney's Office is here to answer any questions specific to the program.
Any questions? My name is Camilo Cruz. I'm the Director of the Community Justice Initiative in the City Attorney's Office. We're real excited. This will be the first time we've had a full-time team dedicated to homeless issues. We're going to have, as she was saying, a DCA 2, we have a DCA 4 here, and we're going to have 3 staff. And it's going to be a full-time team to work on several different components of this, which, as she was mentioning, is a citation clinic. And then also we're going to be having a sort of practice whereby we can take citation dismissals and issues over the phone, which will be the first time we could do that. And then also we're just going to be building up knowledge base about homelessness within the City Attorney's Office to a degree we haven't done before. So we're excited about this grant, and it's kind of a cool showing of vote of confidence from the county to have us, the City of LA, also take on this responsibility for the entire county. Any questions we could answer?
Mr. Price?
Thank you. Well, thanks for the presentation. This is an exciting program. Why is the county transferring it? Yeah, just curious.
My name is Patrick Schwier from the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. The previous program was more of an administrative program that was administered by public counsel. In that program, a person had to be represented at an agency with a case manager, and they had to remain at that location for approximately 6 months. This citation clinic program, while that program did help individuals, the citation clinic program allows for people to walk in off the street, to hear about it that day and just walk in. The other thing that we're doing is we're actually taking it to the different locations. Our first location was actually at Midnight Mission in Skid Row. Our next one is in Venice and Councilmember Bonin's area. We're actually taking it out to these different locations, allowing people to walk in and allowing people to get help even if they're not involved in a program. Our goal in this is to get them connected to services rather than just helping those that are already
So
connected.
you say you're going to Venice next. Do you have a schedule? I mean, can you share that with us?
And a schedule and where the sites will
right,
be.
yeah. I think
We're
that'd be
working
useful
that
so
out
we can
as-
help publicize it and get people there. People need to know what's going to happen.
We're working that out as we go along. A lot of this, because we are starting from the city of Los Angeles, we're having to establish relationships with people in different locations, work out the service providers we're going to connect with. And so we're starting to piece together a schedule. This is our first go-round with it. The first.
Are we also obligated, though, to do the county area?
Yes, yes.
Is that part of this arrangement? We're doing the city and the county.
Yes.
All right,
So Antelope Valley is in December. We're looking to Long Beach in February. So
Well, how many of these events are we planning for the city, in the city of LA? That's still unknown at this point? Or?
we're still working that out because one of the things, as Camilo said, we will be doing smaller clinics. We are taking people in for the first time in phone-in type situations. We're getting requests for us just to, rather than do an entire clinic where we have actual service agencies present, we're going to be going out to different partnership events. We're looking into working with the Midnight Mission at their veteran stand down. We're looking into a program, the Homeless Connect is out in Sylmar. So we wouldn't be running that. We would go out there with a smaller team of people to take part in that. So it's hard at this point to say how many of those we will have. We've committed to at least 6 a year, but we will be doing more smaller events.
Well, to the extent we can publicize it, the program, get information out, I think it helps us get the word to individuals who could take advantage of the program. So it's exciting. I'm looking forward to.
And usually, one of our great avenues for getting that word out is we work directly with a number of service provider agencies. Those agencies come in contact because part of their job is to directly interface with folks who are homeless or at risk of homeless, or working with different veterans groups. So they help us in getting the word out about these different clinics as they're coming up.
Thank you.
So the estimation is that this will serve 300 people at least. Do you have any idea what the breakdown will be between LA City folks and LA County?
At this point, we do not, but we reached our goal of 300 people at the first clinic.
Oh.
At the Midnight Mission, we had over 300 people that we served on that day. We had a number of people that were directly connected up with housing resources. We had people that were connected up with Department of Mental Health, Department of Public Health. So we reached that 300 goal already.
So the 300 are 300 who actually got served, or you saw 300 people, and some you were able to help, some you referred someplace else, some you don't know what happened to? I mean, what does that 300 mean?
Well, part of that is that when they come in, we meet with them, we let them know what agencies are in the room so that they can directly go to those agencies, and we sit with them. An attorney from Mike Fuhrer's City Attorney's Office will sit with them face to face, find out what their record is, and we give them a copy of their record. We tell them if they would like to connect up with a direct service provider, one of the agencies in the room or one that we have worked with in the past, they can do that. Now, we don't force them to go, and we don't it's a voluntary thing whether or not they want to connect up. Sometimes all they want to do, we partner also with the Public Defender's Office. Sometimes they don't even care about their tickets. They just want to meet with a public defender to talk about perhaps another criminal matter, an outstanding warrant or something like that. So there's a private area for them. So we consider that served. When they walk in and they are given help, we can't say that we're going to clear up each ticket for each person that walks in the door, but each person is seen, each person is given a list of resources and directed to connect up with different providers in the room. So we consider them served. We had more than 300 at the last clinic.
Thank you.
And can I'm sorry, let me just add real quick that also as part of the grant we have transportation monies. So the county is paying for a certain level of transportation to and from clinics because, you know, we have the 6 and they're big and there's a lot of homeless people who may not have access to it. So the county also considered getting transportation of those folks to the actual clinics. Again, the county issue, this homeless issue is all around the county of LA. It's not just in the city of LA, and a lot of people move all over. So we're hoping to get some transportation to help with that too. So,
Mr. Bonin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Mr. Fuhr and the City Attorney's Office for their work on this. I actually had a bit of a briefing on this last week, as there's one coming up in my district next Tuesday at the Oakwood Recreation Center from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., I believe. That same day that you briefed me on this, I spent my morning at a new permanent supportive housing facility that just opened in the Del Rey neighborhood of my district, opened by Path Ventures. And I spoke that morning with a gentleman named Ed, who was the first one to move in. And he talked about how he had lived on the streets of Venice and other parts of the West Side for a number of years and had been locked for a very long time in an economic prison. And things that this clinic seeks to address and help resolve can help remove some of the barriers to a job, barriers to housing, barriers to service. So I think this is a really good thing to be doing, and I'm glad to see that the county is giving us money to do this. I want to underscore how important it is for us to, if we're going to do anything on this issue, to work closely with the county, and I want to thank them for their partnership and leadership on this. One question for you. You were talking about who's served and who's not served and how you define served. I'd like you to explain a little bit more about what services are available to folks who attend the clinic to get them into housing or into other services that are non-legal in nature, and how this lines up with the coordinated entry system.
One of the things that we require of all the service provider agencies, service providers that we ask people to consider when they're looking to do their hours, is that agency have some connection to housing. Now, some of them, for example, the Union Rescue Mission, Midnight Mission, they have housing on site. Others have a connection to housing. And then we also bring in different organizations that will partner with us at the clinics. For example, DPSS, LAFLA. We've also had, let's see, we've also had LASA coming out as an area. So again, it's the kind of thing, people can't be forced into housing. The most we can do is we can remove the roadblocks, we can make it easier, we can give them a transition where they have a reason to go and become familiar with these places and get to know the people there so that they eventually can trust them enough to walk in off the streets and stay at these locations.
If there's someone who attends this and is not already in the coordinated entry system database that's being used countywide, are they entered into that by the conclusion of the clinic?
At this point, we don't automatically enter them in through our office. Depending on the agency that they go to, that they connect up with, those agencies often will enter them in. So they could go in through DPSS. They could go in through a connection with other provider agencies.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Huizar?
Thank Thank you. I wanted to follow up on Mr. Bonden's question because we recently passed a motion in council that would require the city in any expenditure we make that whenever we come in contact with a potentially homeless individual, that we enter them into the CES system. So I'm just wondering if we're following that protocol now that we have established that, and I'm not quite sure how far-reaching the motion or the language was, but that's something that I hope we could look at through this activity, because and we'll have my staff get in touch with you and bring that motion to your attention, that we have new rules with respect to expenditures by the city, that when we do come in contact with homeless individuals that we enroll them or have some discussion about CES. So if you could look into that and see how we could use that here as well. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Cedillo. Thank you. All right, thank you all so much. We will now call for public comment. I'll call 3 in a row, and we'll ask you all to line up. We have Becky Dennison, Kristen Cortese, and Peggy Lee Kennedy. While they're coming forward, I want to recognize a champion of poor people and a fighter for social and economic justice, former council member Richard Alarcon. Let's give him a big round of applause. Becky.
Hello, my name is Becky Dennison. I'm with the Los Angeles Community Action Network. We've run citation defense clinics for the last 6 years. We used to do it in partnership with the city attorney. We no longer do that. I understand why it would be a good idea, sort of feels good to support this program, and I do think the city attorney can and must be involved in helping folks resolve their citations, but this is a really expensive way of doing it. It sets up infrastructure that's not needed. There's community clinics working on citations all over the place that the city attorney could partner with. The tickets could be dismissed in the interest of justice that are about criminalizing folks for basic life-sustaining activities, and those same connections to services, first of all, are being made all day, every day amongst service providers, and could also be made in the community-based clinics. And also, I just want to say that if we stopped mass citations throughout the city of Los Angeles, then we wouldn't need clinics like this. So we're talking about $810,000 to do 6 clinics a year. We used to do 52 clinics a year without any dedicated funding at all. So I just urge you to look at the real outcomes of this and redesign the program based on best practices and best use of funds.
Oh, hello. My name
You're
is
on.
Kristen Cortese. I thank you for your time. I didn't really come here all fancy to impress you. I just came representing everyday people. I am homeless and I live in poverty. When I became homeless, my food stamp budget decreased 20%, but my cost of food increased about 200 or 400%. I have a Section 8 voucher. I can't even find a place available in an area that Section 8 will pay. So it's going to get worse than you ever can imagine. Your numbers aren't even represented because when we're fed through 211, I've called 211 1,000 times. I've been hung up on. The FSC has told me they can't help me because I'm receiving public benefits. I don't know, this is very detrimental to families. There are a lot of reasons why people are homeless, and I have 7 case managers that are paid through the county, and none of them do anything to help me. LASA has 10 years of friendly service, right? 10 years plus. They're diligent, compassionate people of integrity. And now there's no help. And I hope to build a rapport. I challenge or invite you to spend a day with me.
Okay, we're going to call General Jeff, John Walsh, and Wayne from Encino.
Hi, Peggy Lee Kennedy with the Venice Justice Committee. We have a monthly citation clinic in Venice, 14 of them once a month that you could work with. And I would like you to turn to page 39 of your report. It has the budget, and it shows that the city attorney, deputy city attorney, would be being paid over $100,000. We have attorneys being paid $0, administrative coordination $0, legal clerk $0, and you know what? We'd like to donate that money to actual housing and maybe an effective outreach. And if the city attorney could work with us and dismiss charges when people are connected to services and waiting for housing, like one of our clinic clients who took 3 years to get housing through St. Joseph's, this doesn't have to cost this much. We have clinics in place. We are in operation right now helping people for nothing.
Thank you.
John Walsh, blogging at HollywoodHighlands.org or J. Walsh Confidential. I just simply like to echo what the previous speaker said. I'm going to give you a gift of about 40 seconds to turn back, and unless someone wants to have me arrested up here.
You're on.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is General Jeff. I'm a Skid Row community activist. I definitely believe that this is a step in the right direction. There are financial concerns, and I definitely concur with what Ms. Dennison said previously. There definitely needs to be full-time, year-round homeless court clinics, a very important, vital component. It also needs to be the cooperation of other regular courts. There are people that qualify for homeless court clinics and that are in regular courts, and they're not passed over and referred over to a homeless court. So that is a problem, and hopefully moving forward, there will be a partnership to say that people that qualify for homeless court can indeed be seen and have their issues addressed in homeless court. Thank you.
So I don't think the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee should be getting things about a court clinic, do you? What do animals have to do with court clinic? Nothing at all. Subject. Well, let's put it. Don't join it in some little thing with animal welfare. Stick it where it belongs, in the budget and finance. That's where you should put legal matters. Court clinics, legal matters. That belongs in Krikorian's committee, not with the Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee, right? We're not talking about animals. We're talking about human beings who unfortunately became homeless because of this greedy, bank-driven asshole society that decides who and who not gets a house. So yes, pour the money in and help these people get off the street with this clinic. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment on this item. Is there any further discussion, members?
I'd just like to add a comment for the benefit of the audience. The money here is a grant from the County of Los Angeles. It's money that can only be used for the purpose that the county has awarded the grant for. So it's not a question of our being able to reappropriate the money for another purpose. This is what the county has offered the money for and what we're using it for. And just so there's no misunderstanding about the other committee referral, that committee deals with personnel issues, and this item asks for approval of hiring staff to implement the program, which is why it's also referred to the Personnel Committee. Thank you.
Excellent. There's no further discussion. Can we have a motion? Second. Any opposition? Hearing none. Mr. Clerk, can we go to item number 2?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Item number 2 is a motion by Councilmember Wesson, Wisar, and et al. Relative to the creation of a new account in the unappropriated balance entitled Serving and Housing LEs Homeless and various funding sources toward the spending plan to reduce homelessness. This item is also referred to the Budget and Finance Committee as well as the Housing Committee.
Excellent. Can we get folks from the CAO's office to come up and give us a short brief and take questions on this matter?
Good afternoon, Miguel Santana, City Administrative Officer. This item pertains to a larger motion that was introduced that includes 3 pieces. One is the establishment of the fund, as was outlined. The second is the identification of $100 million for furthering the work that is being developed by your committee. The third item is to report within this financial status report on the identification of any funding that may be available for this purpose. And the fourth item is discussion on ways that we identify funding for the current year. And so as we move forward and prepare a larger report on homelessness being led by your committee, We're also being asked to identify funding sources that could be spent in the current fiscal year and in future years. The item before you allows the establishment of a special fund. So once those monies are appropriated into that fund, they would transcend year after year. Normally what occurs is that funds that are put aside within the context of a year are reallocated back to the general fund as part of the budget process and then reappropriated. In this case, if a special fund is created, then those funds stay committed within that fund and will be transferred over year after year.
Excellent. Members, any questions? I'll start with Mr. Co-Chair. We saw it.
Thank you. So how does the FSR look, the outlook for the FSR? Do we anticipate, I know it's very difficult to say now, but do we anticipate getting some funding from the current FSR and next year's budget allocations? Or as you heard about this, how did you start thinking about, well, where we're going to, I mean, I think there was a lot of ideas coming from different areas of the city, and how do you see, what are your preliminary thoughts on the sources of these funds?
So every year when the controller closes out the previous fiscal year, we have a better sense of how much additional dollars we have beyond what we're projected. As you indicated, we are in the process of finalizing the first financial status report, and at this point we will most likely identify anywhere between $50 to $70 million of additional funds beyond what was budgeted. That is frankly not unusual. Every year we have about that range around this time of year. Last year, most of that went to cover a number of shortfalls in public safety, primarily the police department and other areas. Normally what occurs is those funds are put aside in the reserve, and then they're reappropriated to identify any shortfalls in the middle of the year, usually around February. And then whatever is left over, for the last few years, a significant amount ranging between $75 to $100 million gets added to the reserve. In the previous years, we've used those funds to cover the next year's deficit. So, the deficits have gone smaller each year. We're currently projecting a deficit of about $90 million for next fiscal year. That's likely to change as revenues improve and expenditures also increase. And so normally if you have a healthy reserve, it helps cover some of that cost. Certainly if it's not budgeted, if it's not earmarked for a particular purpose, it is up to the council and the mayor to determine ultimately how those funds are spent and in what programs. And so one way of tackling this issue is by committing a percentage, a portion of those additional funds for homelessness, either to cover the rollout of the program that ultimately your committee and the council approves for the current fiscal year, and to carry that over for the following year. The motion specifies that the dollars be one time, and so these would be in fact one-time dollars because there are additional amounts beyond what we had budgeted, but we're not anticipating them to come again next year and the year after that. So a portion of these could also surface for that purpose. The motion also doesn't specify the time frame, so it was asking us to look for $100 million without a specific time. And so the way we're approaching this is to try to identify ways to build up that fund over the next few years to, at minimum, hit the target that you identified. And as the year progresses, we'll be in a much better place to determine that. And obviously, the report and the ultimate policy and direction that your committee approves will inform how those dollars get spent and when they get spent, whether they get spent on bricks and mortar or through vouchers or outreach or a combination of all that. What we're hoping is that our report will transcend fiscal years, so it won't be just about what do you do the next 6 months. It really is about a long-term strategy. So the way we're approaching this, the motion is is really, in essence, a budget, if you will, to help fund the initial phase of this program. Ultimately, having a comprehensive strategy around homelessness is clearly going to be more than $100 million of one-time funding. We just don't know what that is at this point.
Thank you. And I just wanted to clarify one thing. So is this a one-time commitment in the motion, or is it a multi-year spending plan? I think the language I'm reading here says multi-year spending plan.
Correct. So we interpret that as being that the fund is to transcend fiscal years, right? So whatever gets put aside will help fund programs for the current fiscal year and for the following fiscal years. So the plan itself will be multi-year, and it's important that you clarify if my interpretation is wrong, but the source of the funding, at least initially, would be one time.
I got it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Thank you.
Mr. Cedillo?
Thank you. Good to see you.
Good seeing you, sir.
I want to just talk a little bit about this in terms of getting a sense of perspective for all of us. So give me a sense of what's the, in broad strokes, the total city budget?
Over $8 billion.
That's general fund?
That's general fund and special fund.
Right. And then current reserves are?
They're hovering in somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 8% of the general fund.
Is there
if you
a,
include the budget stabilization fund and other reserves that you have in total. And that's something we will know the exact number once in the context of our financial status report.
Okay. 7 to 8%. Give me a raw number on that.
Approximately I would say around 300 million approximately.
Average reserve over the last 10, 15 years?
Significantly less than that. So it's only been the last 2 years that we have met our basic policy of a 5% reserve. And that's been a commitment made by your council and the mayor to meet that policy. We also have a budget stabilization fund, which is intended to be the city's rainy day fund, similar to what they have in Sacramento and other jurisdictions, where when revenues exceed the average trend of about 3.3%, then the amount above 3.3% for the 8 largest revenue streams are treated as one time and are intended to be deposited into the budget stabilization fund for when revenue are below that percent. So we know there'll be a recession sometime, in the future, and so we're trying to avoid creating sort of a crisis like what occurred before. And so we've been fortunate that both the reserve fund and the budget stabilization fund have been growing over the last few years.
What was the lowest reserve we had?
6 years ago, our reserve went to approximately 2.5% of the general fund, and as a result, we were downgraded by one of the bond rating agencies.
What was your experiences with the county? What's the lowest? What did they operate at in terms of their budget reserves?
The reserves are generally hovers around 10%. And generally, as a sign of a strong budget, the ideal is about 10%. And the city has established as a goal to reach 10%. We haven't determined when, but we have that as a goal to be in the healthiest place, with all reserves being at approximately 10%.
Okay. Thank you. It's helpful.
Ms. Price?
So there are no real limitations on the use of these funds. I mean, once the council allocate some, as the mayor's identified funding for housing, for winter shelter, but there are no restrictions on how those funds are used once we allocate them. That's correct?
Yeah, that is correct. The whatever additional funds that are currently not budgeted that would be identified in the financial status report would be at your discretion.
And we'll just roll over?
Traditionally,
if there's anything left, just rolls over.
Traditionally, at least over the last 6 years, those funds have been committed to the reserve fund as well as to address any shortfalls, because while we're sharing with you what additional revenue we're anticipating, my staff is also communicating with all the departments and identifying any shortfalls that they may be experiencing. And so we know there are going to be shortfalls in the fire department, in the police department, and a few other departments. And so throughout the year, we'll have to reconcile those shortfalls against any additional one-time revenue that we've identified. So we end the year in the black without any need to dip into our budgeted reserves.
Thank you. Mr. Bonnet?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Santana, for your work on this, not just today, but for the past year or so in particular on this. I wanted to ask a couple questions about the $13 million expenditure. The $13 million that the mayor has outlined, and I should applaud his choices for how to allocate that money. I think it's extremely important that we step up and extend the, sorry, that's me, step up and extend the winter shelter program. And I think it is incredibly laudable that he has earmarked money for rapid rehousing, for rental subsidies to move people more quickly into housing, and put some money into storage as well. That $13 million, is that part of or separate from the $100 million that we're trying to get to?
Well, our goal is to get to $100 million. It's going to be a challenge to do that in the current fiscal year. The financial status report will include the $13 million minus the winter shelter, because that may actually be handled in advance of that, given that the goal is to have it open in November. And so it's, in essence, it achieves the same goals and objectives. So it's really up to your council to determine whether you see that as being inclusive of the $100 million or in addition to.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. The $100 million for technology upgrades for outreach and engagement, can you talk a little bit more about that, or what your understanding is that's for?
I don't think it's $100 million, sir. I think it's
$1 million.
$1 million.
I'm just fixated on that.
Yeah. The purpose of that is specifically around the coordinated entry system. So currently it's a paper-based system. So when LASA caseworkers are out in the field seeking to enroll people into that system, which, as you know, is the foundation of a larger strategy, they do it with paper. They walk around with binders and they try to interview individuals out in the street. Sometimes an individual only does part of the interview and then decides that they want to stop, and then you have to re-encounter them later. And so it's a cumbersome process to be efficient in processing folks so that we could provide them the best assistance. And it's not the most efficient. And so one of the proposals I think that the mayor intended was to provide funding to either use tablets or some other form of technology so it could be done in a much more efficient way and not have to be taken down in writing and then the caseworker has to go back to the office and input it, so it could all be done in real time.
Okay. Of the $13 million, assuming that this money is part of the FSR, which we'll get in Budget and Finance Committee in
later this month.
Later this month. Assuming that that's approved as part of the FSR, goes to council expeditiously, end of the month, beginning of November, how quickly can the $5 million for rental subsidies, which can literally get people off the street very quickly and into housing, how quickly can that be actually expended for service delivery and getting people into housing?
So if your council approves that request made by the mayor, then that direction will be given to the controller. We would need to then establish a contractual relationship. In this case, my guesses would be the county, who currently has a voucher program. We would try to expedite that. We're already starting conversations with the county for that purpose. Clearly, as part of the larger strategy that you've asked us to work with the CLA to develop, that will be part of that program. And so we would hope to get that done as soon as possible.
I appreciate you sort of anticipated my next question by saying you've already started having the conversations with the county. I was going to both ask, can you start the conversations now, but I was also going to ask, who'd be administering the program? I'm only one of 15, but I have some thoughts on how we should be prioritizing what we do with the $100 million. I think I'm very grateful that the council president and the chairs have decided to make our process parallel the timeline of the county. The county's the big dog here, and the county's going to be putting the bulk of the money in. And I think it's very important that we see where the county is going and fill in gaps where they won't be doing stuff, and augment and expand stuff they're doing that's successful. I think you were just sort of hinting at one of the things I've been a strong proponent of, which is expanding the flexible housing subsidy program that they have going. And the county has been very willing, I think, to say that they'd be willing to take some funds from us and target whatever populations we want to do. I think that's important. I think one of the things we have to do is make sure that in the continuum of care that's provided through city and county funds is that we don't focus only on the chronically homeless, that we act sooner to take someone who has recently started living on the streets and get them into housing and services. And the rental subsidy program, the flexible housing subsidy program, the money the mayor has set aside helps us do that. So the other thing I think we should spend some time looking at is the gaps that won't get filled by the county. The county isn't faced with the choice of, do we have encampments on our streets or do we provide storage? We are, and so I hope we'll continue to look at this money as a way to do that kind of stuff. Which brings me to my last question. In our first meeting of this committee, when it was still an ad hoc, I believe it was that meeting, we asked CAO and LASA to sort of prepare a financial analysis of different options for shelter and housing that included permanent supportive housing on one end, emergency shelter on the other end. In the middle had bridge housing as an option. I think we had rapid rehousing in there, and also had safe parking. As we start delving into this, when can we anticipate that report from your office and LASA coming forward to give us those options?
So we just actually got our initial briefing on that framework earlier this week. LASA has been working pretty aggressively to try to put a plan together of what that looks like, what the various components are, parallel to what you articulated, and sort of what the ultimate price tag would be. And so our expectation is, working with the chairs of the committee, is to have a preview of that report submitted to your committee at the next Housing Committee meeting. That will be, in some ways, the meat of the larger report that we're putting together with the CLA, because ultimately, once there's a plan together of the kinds of housing that's required, everything from emergency shelter to permanent supportive housing and everything in between, then the next question is, whose responsibility is it to do that? And so we want to be able to articulate what the city's role is in relation to the county's role in that spectrum, and be able to respond to that. And the final piece is, how are we going to pay for it, which is obviously the most difficult. But but no, that we've been very focused on responding to your specific question, and we hope to give you a preview of that at the next committee meeting.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I could also add, Mr. Bonas, in relation to the county, we have been working very closely with the planning process that the county has been engaged with. As you know, they're having a series of hearings on various topics that mirror much of what you've been talking about. My staff has been involved in helping the county draft some of their policy briefs. We meet regularly with Phil Ansell and the rest of the county team, the CEO's team, on these issues. I met personally with Sachi Hamai, the CEO, this morning, where we discussed homelessness, among other issues. And so it is, in fact, our goal to work in parallel with the county, because we share in this, in the solution ultimately in addressing this problem. They can't do it without us, and we can't do it without them. And I think both sides recognize that.
Thank you.
Mr. Cedillo?
I had some specific questions. Who's going to administer the rental subsidies? Did you talk about that?
So,
is this HCID or LASA?
Well, that's one of the questions we're answering. It is by preference. We're still looking at sort of what options we have. Is that we would not reinvent the wheel to the extent that either LASA or the county is currently managing programs, that we do it in partnership with them, or if there's already a city function that that provides a service, that we expand that as opposed to creating something from scratch.
And just let me ask you a broad question. So, from your perspective, we've got two organizations side by side, both zeroing in on this challenge. Operationally, what's the best model for us to come up with a plan? How do we get the mayor, the county? I mean, you've sat in both seats at LASA. We've got the council, we've got leadership here. You have an army of people interested in, or a cadre of people interested in focusing their efforts on solving this problem. What's the best operational model that you envision?
You know, I think you're asking the most critical question through all of this, and where it always gets fuzzy, right? Ultimately, whose job is it? And our report, our global report, will help answer that. We're thinking about what the options are. One way of thinking about homelessness is in the same way we think about transportation. So, you know, the city, the county, and the other 87 cities come together under one jurisdiction to develop a master plan transportation system throughout the county of Los Angeles. And, you know, there's obviously turf battles that take place, and the back and forth of prioritizing resources and who gets a line and who doesn't get a line and what the priorities are. But at the end of the day, there's one coordinated, comprehensive transportation program that speaks with one voice, that advocates for resources at the federal level, at the state level, and within the people of Los Angeles County. You know, the people of Los Angeles agreed to tax themselves to help fund that program. And then each jurisdiction within that designs their own transportation system with that framework in mind, right? And so it wasn't always the best marriage, but over time it's developed to be a quite effective marriage, and LA County gets more than it gets its fair share, and some people would say more, of resources from the federal government. Homelessness is much the same in that it's not just specific to the city of LA or the city of Santa Monica or another jurisdiction. It really is a regional issue. And to the extent in which there's a regional approach with regional strategic planning, that may be a potential solution to respond to what framework gets put in place to advocate for more federal, state, and even local dollars. And then each individual city could then develop its own unique program around that framework. And so my preference is always to adjust those things that are already in place as opposed to starting something from scratch, because you spend a lot of time just figuring out who should sit at the table and how it should be organized. And, and I think all of you have talked about it, this being a crisis, and certainly treating it as such is clearly the message that you've delivered. And so, so that's sort of Miguel Santana's thinking about it so far, but that's what we're doing now, is working with the CLA and others to develop what the best, and ultimately our job is to give you options. So that's what could be one framework. Another could be, if the city were to take this on its own, what would that look like? And how could we establish more contractual relationships with the county so that there's a clarity as to roles and responsibilities, and expectations and timeframes. In what form, what does that look like, right? If we're not going to do this jointly through a joint planning process, at least how do we sort of operationalize our relationship with each other, right? And so that could be a potential option too. So there's a number of things to consider, and that's what we're working on today.
Mr. Rizar?
Thank you, and that's, I agree with your approach, Mr. Santana. And the other question we have to ask ourselves is not only how are we working together with the county, but internally, how do we build our institutional knowledge of how we will address homelessness? Our approach so far has been scattered with different approaches, different ideas. We need to build that we have to institutionalize how we address this. When you mentioned traffic, I thought to myself that we have to address this as if we address traffic and have a long-term and short-term plan for it. Any other issue that we deal with, we have to start addressing it like that, because it's going to be an ongoing issue that we have to be consistently thinking and talking about how we address it. And I'm glad that this permanent committee is here now, because I think, at least from the council level, we're beginning to head in that direction. Initially, when we started this committee, we were working on creating a strategic plan and hopefully adopting it by December, so that any recommendations in that plan would then be ripe for discussion in January and start the budget deliberations for 2016, so that any recommendation would have a dollar amount attached to it, and then hopefully through that budget cycle we appropriate the dollars. I think what we did now is we put the $100 million up front, which is great, which is now we have that commitment, but it's a floor. So I think even after, as we're thinking about this, at least I get the sense that the commitment for a floor of $100 million. So the report might come out with more than $100 million, and we shouldn't be shy or concerned that it's not $100 million on target. I mean, I think that we're just saying the floor. So I want to set that clear. But at least the commitment is there, and we will have that strategic plan with a dollar amount attached to each recommendation, and then we could start, as you're working on the report as well. But the key thing here as well, the other point I want to make is that I'm glad we're talking to the county so that we make those connections and fill the gaps. And we do officially within our charter, the county charter, have different obligations, right? We're mostly public safety, streets, clean streets, housing, and the county has a bulk of the social service dollars. One thing that we hope that we're going to hear in this committee soon, which is a critical piece to this, I think, is mental health, and how do we, as a city at least, work with the county on that very important component, which is our need to better address mental health overall.
And the county has indicated that they'll be happy to send representatives of public health, health services, and mental health, among other departments, to present on what they're doing, and how we could better work together. So that certainly could be an item for a future committee meeting, if you so desire.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the depth and clarity of your presentation, Mr. Santana. If there's no further questions, we will go to public comment on item number 2. And before we start on public comment for item number 2, I want to ask for her apology. I overlooked a card for item number 1 for Antonio Ramirez, so we'll start with you. Ms. Ramirez, 1 minute on item number 1 and 1 minute on item number 2.
Thank you very much. I was blowing steam, but thank you very much. Number 1, I'd like to say this is a wonderful, stress-free, and long overdue program for primarily those who are victims of gang stalkings and crimes, which resulted in our homelessness. I hope that the homeless court clinic will include loitering, sleeping in parks or in front of businesses and offices at night when these businesses are not in operation, or going from city to city, i.e. going to Santa Monica or Venice Beach to get a shower and sleep and then come back to the city of Los Angeles. To also kick in this program in the midst of an outstanding case where one is representing themselves and it has turned out to be a bench warrant. Also to those victims who daily and nightly travel, and those are homeless victims who get ticketed for traveling on buses, trains, etc. We would hope that that also would help them. And again, help those people who are victims of theft. Okay, and now you said the number 2?
Yes.
Thank you. Homeless and poverty. Stop the criminal gang stalkings. This is how you eradicate or you stop homelessness. Stop the criminal gang stalkings and stop the demonization and violations against legal, law-abiding citizens. Furthermore, deport all these heinous, venomously jealous, wicked, uncivilized, nosy, brawlers, racist, hate-monger, wetbacks, and Chango Latino gangbangers. They are pussies. They are cowards. Teach these pigs how to flush the toilet. Enforce the rule of law. Stop pandering to these dreadful undesirables who think that they are entitled to everything, because everything that these wetbacks and gangbangers have, they have it because they have stolen it from the Americans. Moreover, stop subsidizing all their homes, schoolings, Medicare, transportation, emergency visits, free events, and their free activities, bus passes, tuition, food, nutrition, etc. These undesirables are not above the law. Take care first and foremost of our United States military veterans. God bless America and Donald
Pete
Trump.
White. Following Pete White, Wesley Walker. And following Wesley Walker, General Jeff.
So since the recent declaration of a homeless state of emergency and a $100 million investment toward housing and services, the moral conscience of Los Angeles has been on fire. Unlike other plans and blue ribbon committees in homelessness, your declaration, symbolic in many ways, has galvanized over 120 organizations and individuals that cover the diverse fabric of our city and has brought new players to the table, all galvanized around the idea that criminalization doesn't work. $100 million one time isn't enough, and public health infrastructure is needed now. To this end, we will be hosting a town hall forum on October 27th at Bethel AME to bring the wealth of community knowledge and financial resources of this city to end this crisis. I listened to Miguel Santana when he said it's going to be difficult to find that $100 million. I don't think Angelinos want to hear that. I think Angelinos want to say, let's go across the street. We know where $87 million is at today. That needs to go towards ending this crisis. Thank you.
Wesley Walker, LA Can. Here's a list of our demands. Identify long-term sustained sources of local funding totaling at least $100 million per year. Dedicate the large majority of the resources toward permanent supported housing. Number 2, end all quality of life, safer cities enforcement against homeless residents, and including but not limited to evaluating and repealing impunity laws. B, redirect the $87 million spent on arresting homeless people. Number 3, provide emergency public health resources to people living on the street without major investment in infrastructure. Include mobile restrooms, showers, mobile health and mental health services, volunteer storage facilities.
Good afternoon, committee. First, I want to commend CAO Santana for his wonderful work. Excited to hear that his intention is that this new funding pot will transcend past future fiscal years. However, I respectfully disagree when he says that we do not need to reinvent the wheel, because that's exactly what we need to do, is reinvent the wheel. The existence of this very committee is reinventing the wheel. The existence of this brand new funding pot is reinventing the wheel. It's time to get away from the old and outdated solutions of the old guard, that very ineffective old guard. This is an opportunity for the city of Los Angeles to get it right. You guys are asking the right questions. It's time for the new partners, the new entities, such as this committee, such as the formation of the Skid Row Neighborhood Council, and get the new people at the table to come up with the solutions that to make things work. Thank you.
Ruth Sarnoff, John Walsh, and Wayne from Encino.
I'd like to speak to the need for hearing more voices. I talked to one person from a neighborhood council. It's the only neighborhood council that's responded in writing to this. I think they have to be heard. Number two, I think the communities that have suffered from problems of homelessness for decades, it is an emergency, but it's been a growing emergency for a long time. And I think that the people need to be part of the committees. And I think there's nothing probably in the city charter that prevents you from having representatives who are clients and also people who are advocates for homelessness and who have served the homeless people and the impoverished people in Los Angeles. Thank you.
John Walsh, blogging at HollywoodHighlands.org, or J. Walsh Confidential, tweeting at Hollywood Dems. And I have, all these problems in this agenda item. The perfect solution for homelessness. Everybody move to Westwood and live on the streets in Westwood. They'll find apartments for you really quickly.
Yes, now we know the truth. We're going to get $150 million a year starting this year for homelessness, said the mayor. Wah, 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 wah. Nope, sorry, the money's not there. Another false promise by the mayor. You got to call up the mayor and say, you lied again. We don't have the $150 million. We don't have the $100 million. We don't have $75 million. We don't have $60 million. We don't have $50 million. But I was at the county board meeting yesterday. They got an extra $100 million sitting around. I'm sure if you give me a little bag, and you give me a large bag and it says City of LA, next meeting at Tuesday, I'll give it to Mike Antonovich. Maybe he'll stuff some early Christmas gifts in there, and I can give it back to you. But you got to give me 5%. So I'm only asking for a 5% finder's fee.
Thank you so much. That concludes public comment on item number 2. So members, if there's no further discussion, I want to suggest or move that we hold this item in committee until we've developed our strategic plan, at which time we'll come back for discussion and approve how to use the funds. Additionally, we can direct the CAO to begin the process of identifying unbudgeted and unallocated revenues, as well as existing appropriation that could be reprogrammed towards the new Serving and Housing LA's homelessness account. If there's any discussion on this matter, let's have it now. Yes, sir. Mr. Steele?
There's we're very fortunate. Miguel Santana has an incredible breadth and depth of experience, both with the county and the city and their budgets. And I trust them, but I also, over the last 20 years, have recognized that, there are these fluidities in budgets. that we are at 8%, 7 to 8% reserve. It's nice to have 10% reserve, but frankly, I'd take a smaller reserve if we could dedicate some of that reserve to this emergency circumstance that we have. And so I want to maybe, just as a directive, direct the CAO to look at the reserves as part of the resource funds that we have to help us accomplish this goal, and that we reevaluate our goal of trying to get to 10% or 8% and look at being prudent and following other rules, but be thoughtful that this really is an emergency. We have to act like it and put our money where it is.
Mr. Chair, I have a quick question. Mr. Santana, if we could seek your guidance on this. Given the direction recommendation by the chair, we're going to hold the item in committee as we develop the plan, then know that that is there, and we bring it out simultaneously with the funding and the recommendations. But the motion also asks the controller to create a new account in the UB entitled Serving and Housing LA's Homeless. That could be done irrespective of a directive from the council, right? If you guys anticipate that there's going to be some funding for this, that could be created. So you don't need any action for that, correct?
Well, just a direction to request that the controller establish that fund. And again, even if you don't have consensus as to how much should be in that fund or where it should come from, I think you're right. I think it'd be helpful to, if the intention is to put some amount of funds into that account, then directing the controller to proceed could be something that could be done now. And then as the FSR gets presented, we'll lay out options in terms of what ultimately, how we could dip into various funding sources to move funds for this account.
But we don't need an official action, correct? For the UB to be created.
Well, it's a first item on you do need a direct request that the controller establish that account.
Okay. So it sounds like we need to give the directive to create the account?
Yeah, so the item before you is that the controller be authorized and instructed to create a new account in the unappropriate balance entitled Serving the Housing LA's Homeless. So that would be the direction.
Would this be within the emergency operations budget, or is this free?
No, this would be a separate account altogether.
All right. So today we can give the directive to both create the account and to hold the balance until the committee decides.
So moved.
All right. Second. Any objection? Hearing none, we will go to public comment. Thank you so much, Mr. Santana. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, are we holding this in committee or are we approving the motion?
Both. We're doing both. So we are holding the overall item in committee. We are giving a directive to create the account, but we want to hold that account until the committee comes back.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So now we're in general public comment. I'll call three at a time and ask folks to come up for their 1 minute comment. Antonio Ramirez, Steve Acune, and Fabio Gomez.
Thank you very much. And Councilmember Marquez, thank you for recognizing the error. Thank you very much. I would like to let you know that if you are going to put the homeless people in a shelter, winter shelter beginning in November, do me a favor. I have spoken to a segment of population of homeless young ladies and men who are not junkies, who are not drug addicts and mentals or wetbacks or gangbangers. They're just simple law-abiding citizens. I don't want to be lumped in with all of them. I don't care to be them. That's one problem. Number two is most of your shelters, if not all, are infested with meningitis, encephalitis, MRSA, staph infections, bed bugs, and scabies. I carry my Lysol. I went into one black shelter in Los Angeles, South Central, and they took my Lysol away. I decided it was time for me to leave. I didn't want to be in a bed bug infested place, so I left. I stay and sleep on the streets. I clean my streets. I get Lysol liquid and put it and douse it on the ground. I put several vinyl vinyls on the ground, and I cover myself. But I keep my place clean.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Steve? Fabio Gomez? All right. Shirley Tran? John Walsh? And Nasir Ko.
Hi, my name is Shirley. We're in business on 526 Gladys, 526 Stanford, 617 Stanford, and we conduct business on a daily basis. We have to pour bleach on our streets every single day. We deal with homelessness every single day. I have to be concerned for all our employees because we have to walk across the street to get to our parking lot. I have been dealing with the health department, with FDA, USDC, because our plant is clean inside, but all these rats are coming in because of the homeless people. They set their tents on fire, and my property, my fence got burnt. Now the insurance is not going to pay for it. Now it just looks black, charred. They're spraying graffiti on 506 Stanford, and we can't do anything about it. Please understand our frustration as business law. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Walsh, blogging at HollywoodHighlands.org. It's a pleasure to speak here where I'm not treated anti-Semitically. As you know, earlier today I was thrown out of a meeting for absolutely no reason other than the content of what I said concerning the anti-Semitism of Herb Wesson. And you're all witnesses. I've already filed a complaint with Mike Fuhrer. Nobody should be ejected from a meeting. My relatives fought in the goddamn Revolutionary War for my rights. And I'm telling you right now, I want to vote, and the city attorney was not asked. I understand Herb Wesson is afraid I'm going to mention his gay lover. I won't.
Good afternoon. My name is Nasir Khoshbakhsh. I'm a property owner at 526 and 528 Crocker Street. I've been there about 6 years when I moved there, and the situation was very bad, and we helped with the other business owner and we cleaned it up. The last few months, the situation got tremendously got worse. In the morning, I have to ask and beg very politely, very gently of the people to move from the gate so I can open my business and go inside. The defecation and the urination that outside the property is beyond belief. About a week ago, a customer walked to the warehouse. By the enough that get to the end of the warehouse, she turned around and left because of the smell. I run the fans, I put in the sprayers, but the situation is very, very bad. I appreciate if the committee can help out too. Thank you.
Mr. Kent Smith, who actually filed a card for item 2, or it was mismarked. After Mr. Smith, I have Mona Alamzadeh and Nicholas. Can't read the last.
Good afternoon. My name is Kent Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the LA Fashion District BID and also a member of the Chamber and United Way Task Force on Homelessness. We are very supportive of your efforts and the need to spend some money on this. As you know, it's a complex issue requiring unprecedented partnership between the city and the county. For bids looking after the streets and sidewalks, it is the mentally ill homeless that are the most disruptive to the neighborhood and the most vulnerable. Yesterday, I witnessed an obviously mentally ill person walking under rush hour traffic and defecating. We had over 500 of those incidents in our bid in September. We have over 300 encampments in our district, the most that we've ever seen since I started 15 years ago. No outreach workers are in our district. They're all in Skid Row and none of them work in the evening. Thank you.
After Mona's Nicholas Presovich.
Good afternoon. My name is Mona, and I'm actually the business owner and property owner located on Crocker Street near 6th. And basically, we've been in that area for the past 20 years. We are in desperate need of receiving immediate relief from the crisis pertaining to homelessness. On the daily basis, we are greatly affected by dealing with violence, physical assault, property damage, loss of business, loss of employees, and much more. We arrive at our place of work with having a great amount of stress and anxiety caused by this crisis, and we are forced to operate in the same state throughout each day. Your help is desperately needed and appreciated so that we can get helped to voice our concerns as business owners pertaining to this crisis. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Nick Previsic. I'm a downtown LA resident. First of all, I applaud the council for the state of emergency. However, it has become very obvious that city and county resources, even combined, are woefully inadequate to address a problem of this magnitude. It is an open secret that the Los Angeles greater area is a national attractor for homeless persons. It's a national problem. We're a local concentration. Accordingly, no one should expect the LA city and county to be able to address it fully. Therefore, I strongly advocate that the council and the city try to adopt a movement of sorts to get a state and federal declaration of a humanitarian disaster area, both for mental health and for public health reasons. It is very obvious that there's no other way to directly and immediately get housing and medical attention available. I would also point out that the mental health crisis is preeminent. There should be a means to try to overturn or modify current laws. These people are the prey. There are many predators out there taking them. Eliminate the prey, eliminate the predators.
Thank you. General Jeff, Ed Fukumoto, and Don Garza.
Good afternoon, committee. General Jeff, Skid Row. Just to conclude my thought on the previous item 2 about the new funding pot. That's really a great opportunity because homelessness doesn't need to dip into other pots. It needs to have its own exclusive pot, especially when there's $100 million pledges and you have to go find the funding. But also, when Councilmember Price brought up the question about restrictions, there definitely needs to be restrictions on that. Say, for example, that I love my family in the Venice area, but say, for instance, if Councilmember Bonin said he wanted to upgrade the entire Venice boardwalk, and while there's a high concentration of homeless folks on the Venice boardwalk, he should not be able to have access to this funding pot to upgrade the entire Venice boardwalk. And so I'm just using that as an example, but I love my folks in Venice, and there definitely needs to be restrictions on that funding pot usage. Thank you.
Of course. Don Garza.
Well, I see Mike Bonin is still here. Thank you. The issue right now for those of us in the city of LA that have been here a long time is this boils down to one issue. And the issue boils down to this city for a long time has not thought exponentially, has not had a sense of urgency. This has got to be, these things, if you're going to have it declare a state of emergency, it's got to be done 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 7 days a week. When you're in war, you don't just take a break, and then, okay, let the enemy take over. Things have to be done exponentially. There is a man by the name of Ray Kurzweil that did write a book who just got bought out with $1 billion by Google to be their chief engineer, and his name is Ray Kurzweil. You're going to have to start tapping into these people that understand the law of accelerating exponential returns, because it works the opposite direction negatively as much as it does positively. And if we can utilize these people, these geeks, put them to work, then I think we're going to be able to not solve this crisis, but we should be able to start making headway in this crisis. Though I'll be speaking more about it sooner or later.
Thank you. Ruth Sarnoff, and after Ruth we have Wayne
I think there are some steps you could take immediately that would make a lot of difference. And one would be to raise the general relief from $221 a month. That does not even cover the bottled water that people on Sid Grow need just to survive, to wash their hands and to drink water. Something has to change about priorities. It has to come from the soul. Shelter is a human right. Water is a human right. Clean air, that's the dirtiest air in California, and it's the dirtiest air in the country, is right there, right in the middle of our city right now. And we're adding to it because the new high-rises are having underground parking for the people who live in those high-rises, and they're being built on public parking lots which no longer exist. You are going to have traffic mayhem here pretty soon.
So, want to see homelessness? Go to CD1, 8th and South Coronado Street, between James M. Woods and South Coronado. They got a little wooden clown house on one side of the street and a couch on the other side of the street. 65 calls from the neighbors. They're there selling drugs. They're there all night and day loitering. And what does Gilbert Cedillo do? Nothing. He just lets this happen. He's turned CD1 into the most seediest CD of them all. Nothing. His staff is doing nothing. The community's being overrun by these encampments. But go down, take your phone and make recordings and look at that fucking street and see on each side of the street, absolutely being done on purpose. They're overinflating this problem in CD1, and it's unfair.
Excellent. Thank everybody who joined us for this meeting of the Homelessness and Poverty Committee. That concludes general public comment and all of the items for that meeting. And so if there is no further discussion, this meeting is adjourned. Seeing none, we are adjourned. And now we will begin a special meeting, a joint meeting between the Homelessness and Poverty Committee and the Housing Committee. I want to thank Chairman Cedillo for allowing us to have this meeting together to consider the state of emergency. And I want to thank the inimitable Council Member Fuentes for joining us as a member of the Housing Committee. We will be discussing the state of emergency that we came up with in this committee. I'd like to begin by asking Mr. Cedillo and then Mr. Bonin if they have any comments to begin our proceedings today.
Thank you, Chair. Let me say briefly, and I want to thank Councilmember Bonin for his leadership on this matter. Just let me reiterate, I think, what Don Garza said. We need to act as if this is what it is, a state of emergency, and we need to move forward. I mean, this is our reality. It's an acknowledgement of our reality, and we need to unencumber the operations of the City of Los Angeles so that we can move forward and do the things that have to be done so that we don't have 25 to 50,000 people sleeping on the streets. I've heard this afternoon from the business community, and they are at their ends, but this does not get resolved other than us moving forward. As we've talked about publicly, Mr. Bonin has great insights about how we handle shelter and how we move forward urgently. And then we have the real difficult part is how do we build in this city? How do we go about building 10, 25, 50,000 units of housing for the poor, for the homeless? How do we go about building another 50,000 of units for working men and women in the city? And that's the real challenge. We cannot continue to operate as if it's business as usual. And so we can, through this ordinance, move forward, declare our state of emergency, direct and instruct the departments to conduct themselves as such, and move so that we can create the housing that's necessary and the services that are necessary today. And so that's the essence of our motion. Mr. Bonin was very thoughtful, spent a lot of time going through each word, wordsmithing this, so that we are asking for the broadest parameter of what's within the power of this jurisdiction within the state of California. And so that's our motion. I'd like us to move forward with it so that we could have the emergency declared, so that the CAO can take that as a directive and that we can move forward to do the things that we must do so that we can address this issue.
Mr. Bonin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Mr. Cedillo for his co-authorship with me on this and his passion for this. And I want to thank the chairs of this committee and Mr. Cedillo of the Housing Committee for scheduling this in a joint hearing today. I think it was extremely important that we hear this at the first meeting of this committee after the motion was submitted. I agree with Mr. Cedillo and with Mr. Garza that this is a state of emergency. This isn't a rhetorical state of emergency. This is a real, genuine state of emergency. This is we're living in New Orleans post Katrina. That's right. And we're failing on it as much as the administration did then. We're still responding in terms of our codes and our process and our level of action as if we just had a pleasant spring shower, and that's not the circumstance we're in. So Mr. Cedillo and I worked together on a state of emergency motion, and there's really three components to it. There's the what it means to declare a state of emergency. There's the impact on shelter, and there's the impact on the construction of housing. Right now, we have a state government code which gives us pretty wide and broad powers to declare a state of shelter emergency. And we have a local enabling ordinance which ties our hands behind our back and throws us in a bucket of water and makes it almost impossible to use the power granted to us by the state. It's as if the state said to us, here is a big green field, you can run all 100 yards. And we've made up rules that say you can only run 10 yards at a time wearing certain uniforms with regulated referees on Sunday afternoon from 2 to 4 p.m. That's what our state of emergency ordinance does. The state says you have wide berth to declare a state of shelter emergency, be free from penalty for suspending rules that are otherwise in place for housing and for shelter. And what we've done is, back in the 70s or 80s, the council said it can only be declared between November and March for 120 days with all sorts of restrictions. And we need to suspend that. We need to get beyond that. So the first element of what Mr. Cedillo and I recommend is that the city attorney come back to us with an ordinance that basically gives us the full authority that the state gives us and takes away the micro regulations that we've provided ourselves and take the handcuffs off so that we can exercise our full power. And then from there, once we have done that, Mr. Cedillo and I prescribe a number of different steps that can be taken to make it easier to locate shelter or safe housing in Los Angeles and to build affordable and permanent supportive housing more quickly. You know, we've got to get out of this ridiculous cycle of repeating the same thing and again and again, not expecting the same result or expecting a different result. We're repeating the same thing again and again, making the result worse and worse every time. We have continued to say that our priority as a city is to not allow encampments. We have continued to say our priority as a city is to try to enforce against sleeping on sidewalks. And we've gotten our backside slapped hard by the courts, and we can't keep pretending that that is an option. There are some who keep yelling at us saying, enforce, enforce, enforce. That's not an option available to this city anymore. The courts have been clear. The federal government is getting clearer. That's not an option that we have. And to sit here as council members in this chamber or in our districts and to continue to pretend that's an option is BS, and we're lying to our constituents. We have to, if we want to have people not sleeping on the sidewalk, and if we want to have not have encampments everywhere, we need to provide alternatives to that. And it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be costly, but we need to provide those alternatives. So Mr. Cedillo prescribed some steps that could be taken to build permanent supportive housing. What I suggested in order to provide other options while the permanent supportive housing is being built, I'll list in just a second. I want to be clear, though, that I'm not talking about shelter. I mean, it's easy to sort of pigeonhole what I'm saying as being about shelter. What I'm talking about is, what do we do for the 19,000 unsheltered people in the city of Los Angeles, 19,000 pretty much every night, until the permanent supportive housing is built, until that housing is available? We could spend $100 million tomorrow with the fastest contractors in the world, and we're still going to have tens of thousands of people on the street next month and next year. So the question is, what do we do in the meantime? In some cases, it might be emergency shelter. In many cases, it's probably rapid rehousing and getting people rental subsidies and getting off the street sooner. But in the meantime, we also can't allow our neighborhoods, our businesses, everybody who came up and testified about the impact of human feces outside their business or tents outside their business, we can't allow that to continue. And the only way to not allow that to continue is to get people alternatives to the sidewalk, and to get people alternatives to leaving their stuff on the sidewalk, and to give people alternatives to defecating on the sidewalk. So the section that I worked on in this motion that we've referred to as shelters would do two things. It would make it significantly easier for nonprofits or for churches or temples or houses of worship to provide mini shelter space, or to provide at their facilities safe parking, as is done in the city of Santa Barbara to great success. It would also make it considerably easier for council members or the mayor to use public facilities in the city of Los Angeles for a safe parking program, for bridge housing, and for shelter. It doesn't mandate any of those things happen at any particular location right away. It just puts all of those things as a realm of possibility for the city to do. And before anybody gets too freaked out, the provision for the use of the public facilities, we're not talking about just opening up the gates of every city building and letting people camp out there. What the motion says is that if there is a certified nonprofit or LASA that is operating a program there and has been granted a right of entry by the appropriate city agency, or in the case of the safe parking, if we have a nonprofit agency like Santa Barbara does, that those things are possible. Right now, those things are not possible under our current codes. And if we want to get past this Katrina of homelessness, those are a few of the things we need to do in the short term while we're doing the long-term strategies that Mr. Cedillo recommends. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and Mr. Cedillo. Before we go on with further opening comments, I want to make sure we have the item read into the record. Mr. Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The item is a motion from Council Member Cedillo, Bonin et al. Relative to the request for the City Attorney to prepare and present an ordinance giving the City Council the authority to declare a state of emergency as it relates to the current shelter crisis, with the full range of power authorized by Government Code 8698 to declare a shelter crisis at any given time, without a maximum time limit and without any restrictions not specifically listed in Government Code 8698.
Thank you. Mr. Huizar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My staff had looked into the federal and/or state declaration of an emergency, and it was just a very preliminary review of what we can do. We found that there are some high hurdles to jump, and something along the lines that it can't be man-made. So, parentheses SIC. And so here I think the response might be or may be that we created this because we have failed to provide for our own constituents. But I would like it, if we move this out of committee today, to ask the city attorney to at least do that official analysis, whether not only how do we move forward with a local declaration, but at least, and I keep hearing it from the public as well, that they're interested in seeing if we would qualify for a federal and or a state declaration, state of emergency. So if the city attorney could look at that, and as this comes to, as we move this forward in whatever response we get back from the city attorney, that they give us an official analysis and review and recommendation as to whether or not we could declare a federal and or state of emergency as well.
Excellent. We'll ask for any opening comments by council members Price or Fuentes, and then we'll ask the city attorney and CLA to join us at the desk. Mr. Price?
No, I'm excited about this action. It truly is an emergency, and we need to use all the tools at our disposal to come up with these kinds of solutions, I think, that are going to be responsive. Certainly the leadership of the chair, both chairs on this, and Mr. Bonin, have indicated, suggested that there are the whole range of things that we need to be doing, and we got to do them simultaneously. We can't just wait to do one then the other. So I'm excited to give the instruction to support this motion to get a report back from the city attorney, from the CAO. And as we focus on streamlining, on speeding up this process for whatever solutions we're looking at, let's also be mindful of the bad actors, those who may want to take advantage, of this speed up to create the housing, and all of a sudden it doesn't go where it's supposed to go. And so this is an opportunity for us, I think, to recreate the wheel, and we almost have to do that. And so let's take a look at what we need to do to streamline, to fast track, but also to protect the efforts that we're undertaking, and to make sure that those who deserve the help are getting the help that we are proposing.
Excellent. Mr. Fuentes?
I'm ready for questions, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. So we have representatives from the city attorney and the CLA's office to join us and make a presentation.
Good afternoon, Jack Reef with the CLA's office. And I just wanted to separate one thing out from the overall state of emergency, and that is the shelter crisis emergency that is also referenced in the motion is being handled through the motion that was adopted by council in September, and that will be the launching of the traditional winter shelter program. And anything that would be amending that action would need to be, at this time we haven't reported yet, but we expect that anything that would be amending that action needs to be addressed today during this action.
What do you mean?
Yes.
The motion is...
The other motion, because I believe you're referring to the motion I authored. The other motion said, let's start the emergency winter shelter program early and keep it open 24/7 when it's raining, yes?
That's right. But I was just clarifying that any change to the ordinance that would be extending the time limit on that to allow for the number of days that would be serving would needs to be, we are expecting that to be handled during this discussion, but we're launching the traditional winter shelter during...
Yeah, the item before us, the motion that Mr. Cedillo and I wrote, doesn't have any impact on the emergency winter shelter. That's still, even with the extension we provided, it's within the 120 days and the time period. So we're not saying with this motion, I mean, it's certainly a possibility, but we're not saying with this motion, let's make that permanent year-round.
That's right. I was just trying to say that up front, just so we understood.
Great.
Great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. Adrienne Corisani with the City Attorney's Office. So our office did start looking into the distinctions between local emergencies as defined by the charter and as set forth in the administrative code, as well as the shelter crisis. And we did that after reviewing the motion to try to figure out the best path that we could recommend forward to accomplish what the council members have expressed as their intent through the motion. Under the city charter, a local emergency is defined in such a way that reflects the state code's definition of a local emergency, which is generally a natural disaster, fire, flood, earthquake. And the defining characteristic is the type of emergency, the magnitude of which overwhelms city resources and current services that can be provided. By declaring an emergency at the state level and at the federal level, frees up resources, and when the local emergency is declared, it's usually in concert with the declaration of the state's declaration of a state of emergency. And that gives us the ability to reduce certain regulations. For instance, I pulled up some that happened after the Northridge earthquake. We were able to waive fees, expedite certain permits, etc. A local emergency can be declared by the mayor, that's a charter authority, and from that certain emergency operations are put into effect. The shelter crisis is governed by the municipal code under sections 1280 and 1281, and they also reflect the regulations that are set forth in the state code that allow the relaxation of certain regulations for public facilities, as Councilmember Bonin referenced, and we certainly don't take full advantage of the authority that's given to us there, and we can. And 1281 talks about charitable organizations, and that is the annual declaration that Jack was referencing, where we are currently limited by our own language to operation between November and March. And because that was a city ordinance and that goes beyond what the state contemplated, we can do a lot within that section. And I think that that can be where we address maybe redefining shelter for the homeless in such a way as to accommodate not just a residential dwelling, but more creative ways of providing shelter using parking lots or facilities like that, not just public but also private. So with that distinction being said, as I mentioned, there are ways to go. We still have to be mindful of some of the other limitations of state law. For instance, CEQA is not generous with its exemptions and does limit exemptions to natural disasters. And in that regard, the state law is fairly clear. In fact, right now, AB 1500 is being considered by the state to provide an exemption for homeless housing. However, we won't have resolution of that anytime soon, and so we wouldn't be able to rely on that yet. However, there are other ways we can approach the CEQA clearance, and what I'm also hoping for today is some clarity on perhaps the parameters of the programs that the council wants to institute in order to have a better sense of the project description to be able to clarify and get the necessary CEQA clearances.
I'd like to push back on the CEQA thing.
Okay.
We hear that a lot. I'm looking at State Government Code section 8698 and 86 or through 8698.2 right now. It talks about declaration of a shelter crisis. It means the duly proclaimed existence of a situation in which a significant number of persons are without the ability to obtain shelter, resulting in a threat to their health or safety. I think that's clearly the case in Los Angeles. I think we can make that finding very easily. It goes on to say that upon a declaration of a shelter crisis, the following provisions shall apply during the period of the emergency. And this is what I find to be key. The political subdivision shall be immune from liability for ordinary negligence in the provision of emergency housing pursuant to this section. The limitation of liability shall apply only to conditions, acts, or omissions directly related to and which would not occur but for the provision of emergency housing. It doesn't allow us to be grossly negligent, reckless, or intentional conduct of serious injury. And it says that the provisions of a state or local regulatory statute, regulation, or ordinance prescribing the standards of housing, health, or safety shall be suspended to the extent that strict compliance would in any way prevent, hinder, or delay the mitigation of the effects of the shelter crisis. This is state law. Why, if they're saying that you are exempt from stuff once you declare a shelter crisis, why are we making the presumption that we are not exempt?
Because CEQA doesn't fall under the characterization that's set forth here, which is a statute, regulation, or ordinance prescribing standards of housing, health, or safety. So those are referring to the minimal requirements for habitability. So for our shelter crisis declaration, we have taken advantage of that insofar as we do not maintain the same level of habitability that we normally do. We reduce it to, I think, 50 feet per person, 70 degrees minimum heat. I think there's a fire life safety standard that's required. But those go to habitability, and CEQA is an environmental act and doesn't fall within those. I actually read that several times in the hopes that we'd be able to deal with CEQA in that way. But again, CEQA always sounds very daunting, and we do want to fully explore our options under CEQA. Understanding what the project is going to help us. There might be another exemption that is available to us. There isn't one that covers the type of crisis we're talking about, but there are several others that we would look at. There would be the option of a negative declaration. You know, we would look to see what kind of clearance we would need. But to do that initial study, we just need more information on what the program is or what the options are that council wants to vote on and put into effect.
Okay.
Thank you. So to follow up on the distinction you mentioned on the federal, state, and local, we could declare a local, which has the state enables, there's some enabling legislation for that. But some of the declarations from the state and or the federal government that people are envisioning is that additional federal and state resources come in immediately and almost like a triage. You set up a triage and start assisting people immediately. And we're focusing more on the discourse here is more about creating housing, laxing our zoning laws, et cetera. So can you distinguish between the two and what we can and cannot do?
Yes. So under the declaration of a local emergency, the resources that would be available to the city may not even be applicable to the type of crisis that we're describing here, just by virtue of the way that they're written in our code. For instance, it talks about the Emergency Operations Board taking action and pulling resources to provide immediate power, water, things that typically we don't have when there's a natural disaster. In terms of the ability to relax our building standards or our expedite permit and waive fees, that authority, I do believe, does exist if the council wants to, again, augment what it can do under the shelter crisis ordinances that we have on the books. Right now, one of the findings that you have to make for a shelter crisis is that there's no significant impact, that there are several findings that we have to make that we're in compliance with the general plan. All of that is to, I think, be able to expedite review and use our police powers to address what we recognize as a governmental issue. And so if the measures that are taken to address that legitimate government interest are reasonable, you can do that under your police powers. So in looking at the shelter crisis ordinance, I think that's what we would fall under.
Okay. Well, what about the humanitarian approach that the state and the federal government would provide? What would it take for us to get a state or federal declaration that there is a crisis and an emergency here in the city of Los Angeles with respect to homelessness?
Well, for instance, 8558 discusses the state of emergency, and the emergency is defined as the duly proclaimed existence of conditions of disaster or extreme peril to the safety of persons and property within the state caused by such conditions as air pollution, fire, flood, storm, epidemic, riot, drought, sudden and severe energy shortage, animal infestation or disease, or other conditions which, by reason of their magnitude, are or likely to be beyond the control of services, personnel, equipment, and facilities of any single county, city, and require the combined forces of mutual aid. So we would need an analysis of why our systems are overwhelmed and how they're overwhelmed and our inability to respond within our current capacity.
And then let's say we do that, what would be the process? The mayor sets a declaration here locally, it goes up to the state level, to the federal level, and who decides there whether they should make that declaration?
So during a state of emergency, the governor directs the agencies to respond. The governor makes the declaration.
The governor and now I'm now steering away more from the local kind of shelter declaration versus humanitarian aid and support. And what would it take from the government? They need to hear it from our mayor, from the council? What is the process?
In the review that I've done so far, it looks like it's a communication from the city through the declaration of its local emergency and a resolution, a request. I don't want to say resolution because that has a meaning legislatively. But I think affecting the local emergency is a trigger to
the state.
To the state that there may be a need.
So then we would urge them at that level. What about the federal level? Once the state declares it, then it goes to the federal?
And I didn't research as far as the Fed, so we can look into that to report back to council.
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you.
It seems to me with this crisis, the scope of things that we want to be able to do and do quickly are provide housing for people and provide services. We're not going to be rebuilding freeways or plumbing systems or power generators like you might in an earthquake or a flood. So given that narrow scope, what's your opinion about the value of going after those higher levels of declarations?
I think we would have to probably pull together the resources of other city departments to be able to explain why they were unable to provide the necessary services. We need to know what those necessary services are, what's the statistic relating to the services that aren't being provided right now. We'd have to understand what our baseline is and how the need has exceeded our ability to meet that need. It certainly wouldn't just be a legal argument. It would be based on, I think, findings of facts and evidence, and then the council would be making a statement as to what constitutes that state of emergency.
Thanks. I wanted to go back to the CEQA issue for a second. I'm fully supportive of a federal state of emergency. I'm fully supportive of a state of emergency. I don't want to wait for it. I think we need to do our local one, and maybe that'll make it easier to get the other ones. Our scope is a lot more limited at the local level, obviously, but I wanted to go back to the CEQA argument. Every year for the past 20 years, when we declare the winter shelter, the emergency, we declare a shelter emergency every year. We do it every fall, starting in November or December, so that we can open the armories and stuff like that. We don't have to do a mitigated neg deck or an EIR or anything like that for those.
Right.
So given that we don't need to do it for that, why would we need to do it if we more broadly declare the emergency?
So one of the findings that we make that I referenced a little bit earlier under 1281 is that the project would have no substantial adverse impact on properties or improvements in the surrounding neighborhoods. And you'll recall that when we declare this shelter crisis and trigger these provisions, we also have a list of the shelters that are going to be opened during that time.
But that's going back to my analogy
Right.
of the football field. That's having 100 yards to run that the state gives us versus only having certified teams and with referees and all that.
Right.
If the response, tell me if this is possible or not. Say the response to the first part of the motion, which is to give us the full authority the state gives us, was to simply delete 1280 and 1281. Then we would have the full power of the government code section, right?
So the first part of the motion,
first part of the motion was give us the full authority the state gives us.
Okay.
Get rid of the handcuffs we put on ourselves.
Right.
So one way to do that,
So you wouldn't
probably
have
the
the time
cleanest, would be to delete 1280 and 1281, where the conflict is.
So then you'd have the full power under 8698.
Yes.
And that applies to public facilities.
Okay.
So then you would have the ability to relax the habitability standards for use of city facilities. Our own, well, that's going back to 1280, so that's, right. So that would mean that you would have the minimum habitability requirements that I mentioned earlier, the fire, life, safety.
Yep.
And I have a lot of notes, so let me just grab the right one. Yeah, and we wouldn't be limited as to time. You wouldn't be limited by 4 months out of a year. I want to finish answering your question earlier about, why we don't do the CEQA clearance when we declare the shelter crisis. So we make that finding. That finding is identical to the common sense exception under CEQA. So in 1993, when I think we drafted this ordinance, my understanding, just putting the pieces together, is that we intended to trigger that particular finding under CEQA so that we wouldn't need to do more. And I think it's a legitimate way to approach CEQA for those purposes, because it's 4 months out of a year. We typically know what the sites are. So that's just to fully answer your earlier question.
So what is the recommended methodology from your perspective, from the city attorney's office, to accomplish what was stated in the motion, which was to give us the full authority and to make it considerably easier to do safe parking, to do shelter or services on public facilities, and to allow churches or nonprofits to do the same?
So I think with the declaration of the shelter crisis, you obviously trigger what you normally trigger every year. But if there's a direction to amend the shelter crisis ordinances to remove the time limits, because you don't need those, the state doesn't require you to have those in there, we can amend that to immediately take out the limitations, and you can operate year-round. We would also need a direction to amend the definition of shelters for the homeless to augment that and cover more than just residential dwellings. And perhaps what you would do is, rather than have that time limit, reaffirm the declaration of emergency every 6 months so that you can consistently ensure that that idea is being revisited.
Why?
If you have an ongoing emergency, I think it begs the question at some point, does it stop being an emergency, or how do you know you still have the emergency?
Well, let me start from the original premise of the motion. The original premise of the motion was to give us the full breadth of power that the State Government Code 8698 and the subsequent parts of it give us. How do we do just that?
Okay, so you do need to amend 1280 specifically to get rid of those time limits, and then you amend 1203, which is the definition of homeless shelters, because the state just talks about public facilities. It doesn't say not the parking lot. It doesn't say, we limit that in our own definition. So if you took away those two things, that would give you the full power under 8698. But that's as far as 8698 goes, because that only deals with public facilities.
1280 also has other restrictions other than the time limit, though, doesn't it?
So 1280 has the time limit. It requires the yes, it requires notice and the precise location to be identified by council. And prior to the council action, notice of a public hearing has to be mailed to all the abutting properties and neighbors. So you'd have to have a second hearing.
So yeah, so what that's saying is, because I was saying we should be taking some of that out as well, is I don't want a church or a temple, and there's one I have in mind just outside my district that is eager to provide safe parking. If they're going to take 3 vehicles, why do they need to go through a long, exhaustive process?
Well, they don't have to, because they'd fall under 1281. Because, again, 1280 only applies to government property. But 1281 doesn't have the notice provision No, it does have a notes provision. Okay, so 1281 would be amended then to change our requirements. But 1281 isn't born out of state law. 1281 is our own ordinance, 1281 being the one that just deals with the private properties. So you would amend 1281 to, again, reflect that there are no time limits, remove the notice requirements, and because 1281, again, is a clear exercise of a city's use of its police powers, I think that's the place where then you also explore the use of a safe parking program, because we're using our police powers to address this homeless crisis, and one of the reasonable ways to do it is to allow private businesses, nonprofits to use their parking lots. So then that program, and whatever its parameters are, what are our minimum standards for bathrooms, hours of operation, what's the enforcement, that's where I think that could be developed. You could reference it there, you could have a separate standalone ordinance. I'm not trying to be vague, it just sort of depends on what you want that program to look like. But I think that certainly under this idea of a shelter crisis, we would want to just use the same muscle that we're using to do that.
What I'm trying to get to is, back to, say we had a Katrina-level hurricane here, and we had to act immediately, which I feel we have to act immediately. If that were the case, we wouldn't be sitting down and deliberating for weeks about separate rules and processes for a safe parking versus a shelter bed versus a storage facility. We would be giving sort of a blanket approval, and I'm trying to get us as far as we can legally, given the restrictions you've outlined from CEQA, to that.
Okay. So in a best case scenario, we'd be able to identify an exemption. And I have to speak hypothetically because, again, I don't know the project description we're working with. In a best case scenario, we'd be able to use an exemption. Beyond that, we might be able to do a negative declaration. We'd need to talk to our experts at DOT to understand what the thresholds are and to try to figure out, whether or not we're triggering them. And again, CEQA always sounds daunting, but there are ways to expedite our review. The circulation is something we can't change, so we're looking at 20 to 30 days depending on what the level of review is. An exemption wouldn't require that, but a negative declaration would. But having said that, without knowing what the project is, I don't know what impacts we'd be looking at. Maybe we're not looking at impacts, and that would be the best case scenario.
Yeah, I think we're far afield from the intent of the motion, which was to just make it easier to do this stuff. A 20, 30 days process is really what we don't want, is we want to make this easy to do.
Well, there are immediate steps you can take to get rid of those time limits.
Yeah.
So there are certainly things that can happen immediately. But in looking at relaxing certain standards, separate from the parking issue, for instance, if you want to address expediting the development of affordable housing, we would still need to be talking to the city departments that deal with those regulations, finding out what the impact of fee waivers would be, what's the financial analysis of that. There are only so many steps we can take immediately, but there are definite steps we can take immediately.
On giving us the full state authority, the looser ability to declare an emergency, in the ways you were describing of amending 1280, 1281, and 1203, how long would it take you to draft that ordinance for this committee's consideration?
We can do that very quickly, because that would just be eliminating time limits. I think that does not require circulation or anything like that. So if you'd like us to come back next week, I think that would be reasonable. And that would be just to give you the authority that you have under 8698, so dealing with public facilities.
Yes, and how long would it take you to come back with something that allows, the safe parking could be on public facilities, but it also could be private facilities?
The safe parking is the one that may take longer only because I still, am not sure what our actual program will look like, because we do need to talk about what the minimum standards are going to be for habitability. Do they need to have access to a restroom? What's the capacity? How are we going to deal with overflow? You know, what hours are we talking about? What's the process to get, to be able to have your parking lot? Who does the approval to have your parking lot be one of the safe parking?
Well, it's a chicken or an egg situation. Right now, we can't create a safe parking program because it's not really legal. So we're trying to create the legal framework so that a safe parking program similar to Santa Barbara could happen here.
Right, and we have been in contact with Santa Barbara, actually, so we do understand what their program looks like. And so if we wanted to mirror that, we can duplicate the ordinance and bring it back. They were trying to give me more information about their own environmental clearances last time I spoke to them, so I expect to get that. But it's within your legislative authority to amend the city's code to allow that kind of program. So it's not that you don't have the authority, it's just that we can't necessarily grant the use of a program that doesn't exist yet because we haven't legislated that program. So if we bring back an ordinance that looks like Santa Barbara's, then the council acts on it and that safe parking program can exist. If we amend immediately the definition of 1203 so that it's not limited to residential dwellings, then as soon as that parking program goes into effect, arguably it's covered.
So you could bring that in with the ordinance revisions we were just talking about?
The parking program itself?
No, changing 1203.
Yes, we can change the definition of 1203.
That'll be a start.
Okay.
Mr. Cedillo.
Mr. Bonin, you're an extremely patient man. Let me say that we can do anything that we want unless we are explicitly prohibited, that we use and we are empowered by this ordinance to make these declarations, and that we are the client for the city attorney, and the city attorney is going to tell us how to do these things. I want to say that, all the things that were late. First of all, I'm not looking for a federal resolution here, although it's been acknowledged that the feds have told us we have to stop using draconian policing measures to address this matter. And if not, we have to pay for it. So there is that. I'm not looking for the state to resolve this problem. I'm looking for us to maximize our authority to enable us to move forward with all haste. This is an emergency situation. I don't need a lawyer to tell me whether it is or it isn't. Right? We have 25,000 people sleeping on the street. They are without, as the conditions come, if we were in post-Katrina, they are without access to water, they are without access to shelter, they are without access to power. That's an emergency. Their life and safety 24/7 is in jeopardy. So those are the findings that are, for me, sufficient for us to evaluate everything that we do in the framework of a emergency. The power of the mayor is delineated, but it's not exclusive. And so while the mayor has an authority to do this, and we can call him up and ask him, Mayor, why don't you just declare this state of emergency so we could, move this conversation forward, we're not precluded from doing that. And this is what our efforts are today. There's no preclusion. There's nothing that states in the code where it says mayor and council, state of emergency. There's nothing there that precludes the council from taking the actions that Mr. Bonin and I and the rest of us here in the committee desire to do. I would like to know how we can do this as fast as possible with respect. My interest, obviously, is in the area of the housing, to move us forward so that we can do the things that we need to do so that we can build the micro units, so that we can, our proposal is simply to move the fees to the back end and not have them utilized until there's a certificate of occupancy, to use the powers that we have so that we can move all of this forward. Right?
So I think one of the items that you had requested in the motion was a report back from the departments of planning and building and safety to report on what those regulations and what those statutes would be that would require suspension or relaxing. So if the idea is that it's a temporary fast tracking of all permits and entitlements, that could be, again, under our police powers in a response to a declaration of the shelter crisis that we've talked about. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything beyond that.
Yep.
And the issue of deferring fees, I would look to the CAO to assist in that analysis, because when we defer fees, it's a little different from waiving fees. Because fee waivers require us to be able to supplement or somehow make up the shortfall.
Right, augment or substitute.
So deferring fees, I think it's going to require maybe some feedback from our budget experts to just tell us what that means and what that looks like. But it's something that can be legislated as part of that temporary fast tracking for the development of a certain type of housing. And then we'd need to define what that program looks like and be very clear as to what housing can qualify, because we're essentially incentivizing a type of development. So what does that look like? What are the parameters? Which department takes the lead? What do building and safety and planning say needs to happen to actually have that practically work? But all of that could be part of the declaration of the shelter crisis, not necessarily an amendment to 1281, but as part of that declaration, and the city is also going to legislate the following program.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Fuentes? Mr. Price? Excellent. Mr. Reed?
Let's roll.
Mr. Bonnet and Mr. Cedillo, you're very thorough. Anything else from the CLA's office?
No.
Okay.
We're okay at this time.
It's okay. Thank you all so much.
So are we moving this to council? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
The idea is that we move this to council.
Should we could move this to council, or we could ask city attorney to draft the language to effectuate what we've been discussing, and then have that come back here and then bring it to council. That might be
Come back to a joint committee?
Yeah.
I think we need to move it to council so that council can direct it. I think it goes council first and then they'll do it. We make the ordinance and then they do it.
I think we could get the state of emergency declared more quickly if they drafted the ordinance and then we brought it to council. It's a two-step as opposed to a three-step.
How do we get this done in the fastest way possible?
So the
fastest way.
Okay, so fastest way, the declaration of the shelter crisis but with the request for us to bring back an amendment to give you the full authority under 8698 to remove any unnecessary provisions having to do with notice or time limits under 1281. And there was one more thing we needed to change.
The safe parking.
Safe parking time limit.
Oh, the definition for 1203. Yeah.
So what I was suggesting is that you make those draft changes. You make those changes. Bring us a draft ordinance at the next meeting here, and then we can bring it to council within days after that, rather than scheduling a council hearing, coming back here, going back to council.
Because if this goes straight to council, there's going to be a lot of confusion there as to, they weren't privy to this discussion. If it goes to full council,
Right.
and this way we clarify some of the...
We owe them a draft.
Yeah. And also, if you could provide that full analysis as to the federal, state, and local, it seems like we're taking the route of shelter emergency.
Right.
Some people, even the public, is expecting the humanitarian federal FEMA assistance type declaration. And if we cannot achieve that, why is it that we can't? But at least we have that full analysis as to what that looks like, because I think that was the expectation by a lot of folks when we talked about this. We want to be clear, it's a shelter emergency.
And can or should we do both simultaneously?
Okay.
Yeah. So we got some public comment cards, gentlemen.
Okay.
That we got to deal with before we take a vote. So as I call your name, if you could come up, you have 1 minute to speak on the matter. Mark Ryavec, Matthew Gary, Boris Mazels. Yes, sir.
Could I wait a second until your colleagues sit down?
Your time is running, so it's up to you.
My name is Mark Ryavec. I'm the president of the Venice Stakeholders Association. We represent residents in Venice concerned about public safety and quality of life. Our organization is currently suing the city and county for maintaining a dangerous public nuisance along the Venice Beach recreation area. We are concerned about the details of the authority under the Cedillo bond in motion to declare a state of emergency under state law relative to the shelter crisis. We would ask that the new ordinance come back here so that we can see the specifics of it before it goes to council, because Mr. Wesson has a propensity to not let there be too much public comment when it's before the council. So it really should come back here. We would also ask that there be a 300-foot buffer between any outdoor shelter and any parking lots that are dedicated to this use. Our problem in Venice is not that we have people sleeping on the streets and people sleeping in their cars. Our problem is that they are right next to residences, and we would really ask that you ask for a 300-foot buffer between safe parking lots.
Thank you. That's your time, Mr. Gary. What's next? Mr. Mazels. All right. I want to call for a special comment from Council Member Alacon. Turn this here.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me commend the makers of the motion for taking on this issue. The public is crying for action, and it's a tremendous challenge to meet their goals and objective beyond the words that go on down on the paper, and make the action necessary to have real change. I also want to commend Councilmember Wesson for creating a homelessness committee. It's about time that we had a standing committee to focus on this daunting task. A few weeks ago, there was a young man who was stabbed in Van Nuys. He succumbed to his injuries at Northridge Hospital. When hearing that, my daughter and I spent the better part of the next morning trying to figure out whether that was my son. My son is homeless in Van Nuys and has been for over 5 years. I know the personal tragedy that occurs, but we were nevertheless relieved to know it wasn't our son, but we were saddened to know that there are people who are going to die because they're homeless, simply because they're homeless. The fact is that we lose more homeless people to death in 1 month than we have in any major disaster affecting this city in our history. We lose more people every year than California has lost in major disasters to homelessness. And so it must be declared an emergency. I really appreciate the conversation that has occurred today because it seems that you're looking at both micro solutions as well as macro solutions. If the laws don't work at the state, then let's change them. Let's make sure that we create a legislative package that goes to Sacramento and gets them to understand the nature of Los Angeles' peculiar problems related to homelessness. I think you can do that. Several of you have been in Sacramento, and you certainly know your way around the Capitol to make that happen. I'm hopeful and that you will be able to sustain this effort. Because there will be challenges, and I know that sometimes many of the obvious goals to create more housing, to expedite planning, to overcome some of the barriers that limit our sheltering possibilities will seem daunting and impossible. Nevertheless, we must make those our challenges, and we must move forward. So again, thank you so much for taking this head on and going public with it, not doing it behind secret doors. I think you addressed Mr. Ryavec's question by bringing it back to this committee. That's exactly what you're doing, and I think that's appropriate. But again, I want to thank the committee for taking this on. I should say both committees for taking this on. This is the real deal. Mr. Cedillo, thank you so much for once again embracing what some might call an impossible task. But if you don't do it, maybe nobody else would. Congratulations.
Thank you. We have Blair Beston, Nicholas Prevasic, and Sunny Lee.
Thank you, council members. My name is Blair Beston. I'm the Executive Director of the Historic Core Business Improvement District, and I'm also a resident down here, a single mom raising a 2-year-old. I want to thank you. I'm very encouraged to hear you talk about speeding this along as quickly as possible. And also, I'm very encouraged to hear the conversation shift from just one of keys and wet housing to one of shelter facilities and emergency care. It's going to take years. We know this. Thousands upon thousands of people living on our streets. So we really need to create multiple and immediate options. And we also need to be increasing, not decreasing funding for shelters. I also want to please make concurrent with this the consideration of this as a mental health crisis, really focusing on legislation. How do we get these people into care and into facilities where if they're severely addicted, they can detox and they can be stabilized before they get those keys? Thank you.
Come on up.
Good afternoon. My name is Sunny Lee, and I'm a Director of Student Residential Life at a new international boarding high school located in downtown Los Angeles. Currently, we're at about 35 students, and within the next few years, with our building complete, we'll be at about 250 to 300 students. Part of the benefit, and the advantage of being in Los Angeles and educating students here is the rich cultural access to the rich cultural buildings and things to see and the events. I've worked in downtown for the past 15 years, but within the past recent years, I've seen a significant change within the homeless population, which directly affects the safety of our students. Our students travel from the financial district to the Staples Center, to the Music Academy, to Little Tokyo. So for this reason and many others, I would like to urge the council to make downtown a more livable community by getting people off the streets and creating a safer downtown for my students as well as all its residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. David Fitzgerald, Amanda Leon, Don Garza. Mr. Fitzgerald first, Ms. Leon second.
Good afternoon. My name is David Fitzgerald. I'm the Dean of Students at AUP High School here in downtown. I am also a resident of downtown. And as walking home last night, I was once again accosted and almost assaulted by what I presume to be a mentally ill patient wandering the streets. Fortunately, I fell into a bush, but I was fine. But that was me, and I could handle it, but this is something that cannot happen to my high school students. This will jeopardize the future of our new school here in downtown LA. I urge the council to do something with maybe giving more money to the mentally ill services, provide more social services for those students to prevent incidences that happened just like me last night. I thank the council for taking action, and really I enjoyed the conversation and getting this issue solved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Amanda Leon. I'm a 5-year downtown resident. Previous to moving downtown, I worked in downtown for 10 years. I have witnessed the homeless population grow into what can now only be described as a tent city, a slum in the heart of America's second largest city. I ask first that you not criminalize poverty. Second, that you look beyond subsidized housing as the only solution and towards a comprehensive program that includes mental health, job training and placement, and reintegration of convicted felons. Third, I wish that you address the inhumane conditions that coexist with homelessness, including trash removal, open drug dealing use, and discarded paraphernalia, and basic hygiene services, such as including public toilets or increasing street and sidewalk cleaning in areas where feces and urine flow freely.
Thank you. After Mr. Garza, we have Steve Clare, General Jeff, and Pete White.
Andy Bales put a card up, so can I have my time back? I just was talking about
Let's go.
Andy.
You got to roll.
Okay. Well, the issue again, once again, is the exponential. And I think this city committee and the city council is now understanding. We asked ourselves, what happened? We had all these plans to solve homelessness. What happened was that, once again, we live in an exponential world. Google understands this. They all understand this. All the businesses understand this. City government's going to need to understand this. We woke up one day thinking, hey, we're going to solve this issue. But we thought linearly. And all of a sudden, that is the issue. That is what happened. We raised our head to see that it's exponential. Mike Bonin, you're getting it. Gil Cedillo, you're getting it. Weezar, you're getting it. But you're going to have to start letting these people understand. We got to stop thinking linearly. Tomorrow's not, let's wait till tomorrow. It's not going to happen that way. It's got to happen 5 seconds from now.
Steve Clare, General Jeff. Eddie H. after General Jeff.
Afternoon, I'm Steve Clare. I'm the Director of Venice Community Housing. We have transitional housing for homeless women and children, permanent supportive housing. We're also operating a storage program for homeless people in Venice Beach. I am incredibly impressed and appreciative of the discussion here today. I'm stunned and amazed, really, and I would want to associate myself with the remarks of all the people on the committee, and particularly Councilman Cedillo and my own councilman, Councilman Bonin. I just want to thank you for the perceived urgency that you're putting in this situation. There's so much to talk about, but let me just focus on the shelter question just for a second, since that's sort of what most of the conversation's been focused on. In our district, the 11th district, we've got 2 maintenance yards which are underutilized, 2 vacant firehouses, 1 vacant senior center, 1 vacant animal shelter, and 1 underutilized community center. All or some of those could be, and plus the associated parking. So if you get your thing accomplished, there are facilities available and ready that you can be made operational before El Nino comes this winter.
Thank you.
Which is going to be devastating to lots.
Thank you. General Jeff, then Eddie, then Kristen Cortez.
Good afternoon, General Jeff Skid Row. First, I want to applaud this committee for listening to the Skid Row residents and community leaders in regards to declaring the state of emergency, both on local, state, and federal issues. But let's not stop there. Let's widen the parameters when we talk about the United Nations, because there's definitely human rights violations because of the inhumane conditions in Skid Row specifically, and the city of Los Angeles to actually take a look at allowing itself to be declared the culprits and offenders of those violations in exchange for international resources. Also, too, there was a war on poverty that was declared federally, and so that means if the city of Los Angeles would allow itself to be declared guilty of war crimes, we can take this to, in violation of Geneva Conventions and actually go to the International Criminal Court. Also, too, when we talk, we need to focus on the definition of a natural disaster, because while natural disaster is about one moment in time, Skid Row, over the course of 40 years, is an elongated, sustained natural disaster.
Thank you. Kristen, Eddie, Ruth Sarnoff. Kristen, all right?
Kristen Cortez, District 8. I thank you so much for this dialogue. One thing, contact with constituents doesn't really mean you serviced us, or the agencies helped us. Okay, declaring a state of emergency would be great. The city has a lot of unused buildings, as somebody mentioned, that could be modified. We can also consider the private sector. Maybe Angela Jolie will help build another shelter. And also we can maybe change the way we currently access the funds. Because I hope that we can avoid the bureaucracy that prevents those that most needy from getting the help. Personally, the county, for 6 weeks in the motel, spent $3,000. And then they said there's money for a rental subsidy that I don't qualify for, but they can't use it for crisis housing. So while crisis housing is very important, because we need to live somewhere while we're waiting for our rapid rehousing. We need to exist while we're waiting for our permanent housing. And there's just no place. And so we talk about people on the street, we have children on the street, and when it gets fuzzy because there needs to be a dialogue from people who are actually receiving the services. Thank you.
After Ruth, we'll have Don and Laura. Don Davis and Laura Hill.
I think we have to look at the things also that are propelling people into homelessness, because we are going to be flooded for some time to come. We still have about 30,000 homes in the county of Los Angeles that are in some state of foreclosure because, contrary to the way it's treated, the housing crisis is not over with the mortgages. And also, as the gentrification of the downtown continues, it keeps rolling more people as it forecloses and they get evicted. So you're spinning more people. I would also ask you, as a positive thing, to take it to LA Unified School District. Mr. Huizar, you're very familiar. You were on the board there. The parents there will give you a lot of clues because they were involved. And I heard a lot from the parents right after the big storm on the coast that we were talking about. That's name I'm forgetting right now.
Thanks.
My name is Dawn Davis. I live and work and do voluntary homeless neighborhood outreach in my neighborhood. First, thank you for making the motion regarding Government Code 8698. We most certainly have a shelter crisis on our hand as well as a mental health crisis. I will basically piggyback on Ms. Beston's and Mr. Fitzgerald's comments. I, too, recently was accosted by someone who was either mentally ill and or homeless. And there are many stories of that, pardon me, in our city, and that needs to stop. Mental illness, particularly downtown, has become a matter of public safety, not only for all the residents housed and unhoused. I would ask that you consider shelter for the mentally ill and the drug addicted. You may not be aware that currently a 72-hour hold mostly consists of giving the afflicted some type of meds, sending them back out on the street 30 minutes later because there is no space at the facilities. We need to stabilize and reduce and eliminate the addiction first before we can evaluate and treat the mental illness. The appropriate parties need to be brought to the table to change the policies at the state level regarding assistance for our mentally ill, and we need involuntary housing to stabilize and reintegrate them into our society.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura, and I represent the South Park Business Improvement District. We're a 32-block district in downtown Los Angeles, which includes LA Live, the Convention Center, the Staples Center, and a fast-growing residential population. The BID is faced with the issues surrounding homelessness every day, particularly in the area of public safety and health for our businesses and residential population, and we're deeply concerned with the crisis at hand. The BID is in support of the motion to declare a state of emergency on homelessness and understands the complexity of the issue. We are eager to see details on how funds will be allocated in the short and long term. Investment in permanent supportive housing is a must. However, there needs to be more of a focus on creative alternatives to living on the streets in the immediate future. We simply cannot wait any longer. Please also consider the necessity of providing education and employment opportunities, and in particular, mental health services in addition to housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Peggy Lee Kennedy, Reverend Andy Bales. We missed Reverend Bales, okay. Proceed.
Thank you. Peggy Lee Kennedy, third generation Venice resident, and guess what? My daughter was fourth. I have to tell you that this is a long time coming, and in 2003 I was elected to the neighborhood council in Venice then, and we formed a committee on poverty and homelessness, and one of the first things we did besides lobby for toilets, open toilets, was a state of emergency based on Eugene, Oregon, wrote a state of emergency on homelessness in 1999. And they, after which, created programs, emergency programs that you guys are considering now. And you might think of that, and also asking people who are really close to the situation that maybe you don't want to talk to because they've disagreed with you on criminalization. Because we have ideas about streamlining things and doing things for less money than $100,000 for technology for a stupid list that you won't even be able to find the people. Once the housing.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Antonio Ramirez and Wayne from Encino.
I came here many years ago when I had a home. Used to come to the committee meetings, and Richard Alarcon, Mr. Fraud, and Mr. Hypocrite used to throw me out and censor me. I was having problems with vandalism, noise pollution, toxic brawls and violence, theft, harassment, and all that in East LA. It was my attorney, Tatiana Metters, and Teddy Randall, who told me to move out of East LA because the East LA Sheriff's Department, the pandering pussies, also did not assist me. Subsequently, over the years, I ended up living on Broadway. I sleep on Broadway between First and Temple, and I don't sleep next to the junkies or brawlers or gangbangers or wetbacks because one, I'm not a pig, I'm not a thief, and I don't want to involve myself in that environment. I like to at least live in a healthy environment. However, I sleep next to my 2 broken shopping carts with popped wheels, and the blacks and the browns and white trash continuously steal and trash up my things and damage my property. That's what I deal with every morning. Thank you.
It's good. State of emergency. Woo, 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 woo. Everybody put on your helmets. It's a state of emergency. So now we know we cannot get the Olympics here because of the state of emergency. We can't bring any international events here in such a dangerous situation as we have here in the city. So now the Olympic Committee will now know on the record that the city of Los Angeles has declared a state of emergency. It is too dangerous to come here with this dangerous situation. Holding an Olympics would be far, far, far impossible because this city has to concentrate on mitigating the state of emergency. So you need to go and tell the mayor to withdraw our bid. Do not,
got to stay on this
our
subject.
bid for the Olympics must not go through because of the state of emergency. And this state of emergency will be in effect for some time. Woo, 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 woo.
That's your time. Thank you. All right, give me a signal when he gets back, but I want to call the city attorney up so we can just be clear on what we're voting for or asking you to do going forward.
Sorry, thank you, council members. In looking at my notes again, I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what I'm coming back with. So if I gave the impression that I'm coming back with a full ordinance, I apologize. What I can do is come back with a report addressing Mr. Huizar's questions, addressing what the ordinance could include should council direct us to do that. But also now that I understand the parameters of the safe parking program, I do think I can come back with more information on how expeditiously that can be included.
Why can't you come back with a draft ordinance?
Because the full council hasn't directed us to transmit an ordinance.
Yeah, but we have draft ordinances come through committee before council makes a direction 50% of the time.
That's not our office's
yes, it is.
Policy.
It's your office's policy when it wants it to be its policy. We do it about 50% of the time.
I think the city attorney is going to have to probably tell me that that's what we're going to do. But for now, I know that I can come back with a report that includes the necessary provisions that you're looking for to explain what would be happening.
So that's what we'll ask you to do, and we'll ask.
Thank you. And Mr. Bonner and Mr. Chair, I think that's a question worthy of exploring further, not only for this committee, but other committees. In the past, we've had ordinances from the city attorney come back to committee, and after we ask them to draft them, it appears that there's a new direction, new protocol being followed at the city attorney's office that they would like to have the city council first give the direction to bring back drafted ordinances. Either way, we need to clarify for the council. Maybe we could work with Council President Wesson and the city attorney's office to figure out what is the process, because it's changed and it's new, and I've also recently heard that in Plum Committee, but we need to clarify that and see what...
I think you're right, because it's been inconsistent, and I think it's about 50-50, and not your fault, but it's been an inconsistent policy, and I won't comment further on that.
So So is it the pleasure of the committee that we ask the city attorney to come back with an ordinance that includes answers to Mr. Weezar's questions, parameters for the safe parking, and then exploration of a shelter and state of emergency paralleled process?
Included in the report.
Yes.
We could phrase it as request the city attorney to come back with a draft ordinance or report, so you can come back with whatever the maximum of the authority in your office will allow you to do. And then if it's a report, we can sort of refine it a little more and then send that request for direction to the council to vote for that, I guess.
Okay.
All right, we got a motion? Second? I just did all the public comment. Oh, Andy Bells, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Reverend Bells.
Don? Thank you. Sorry to have to run out. Honorable City Council members, I want to echo what you've said and applaud what you've said. An emergency declaration calls for an immediate response. Please do not continue to believe long-term plans, housing first, harm reduction for a few are the immediate silver bullet solution to homelessness in LA. This is part of what has led to our current epidemic of homelessness. Emergency shelter services are also in need. I'm not asking for the money, but with $151.5 million and leveraging empty county facilities, we could provide 24/7 shelter and services tonight and for the rest of the year for 5,908 precious people. 3,030 would be housed this year and 1,297 would find jobs. Even immediate organized tent cities outside of Skid Row would be an improvement, not an enablement of a lifestyle, as was recently said in an editorial by another city councilman. Organizing self-governing tent cities with porta potties, showers, case management have 5 rules working effectively in Seattle. No violence, no illegal substances, no stealing. Everyone gives 10 hours of community service. No behavior that disrupts peace or welfare.
Thank you.
That's a big improvement over Skid Row. Thank
you so much. All right. Members, we have a question before us. Is there any opposition? Hearing none, so ordered. Thank you all so much. This concludes our special committee now, our joint committee. Now we have to open up a special meeting of the Housing and Homelessness and Poverty Committee for one item. Mr. Clerk, will you read the item into the record?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The item is a motion from Council members Harris Dawson, O'Farrell Wesson, Weezar, Bonin, Buscaino, relative to the request for the Chief Legislative Analyst, with the assistance of the City Administrative Officer, to report on best practices in use by other municipalities who have significantly reduced the number of homeless persons in their cities.
Do we have a representative from either of the makers of the motion's office or the CAO on this matter?
Mr. Chair, I'd say that.
Seeing none, I would ask if there's any discussion on the matter from the members.
Seems self-evident, and I would move the matter.
Excellent. Do we have a second? Second. Hearing no opposition to the matter, so ordered.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have to do public comment on this item. We have Wayne from Encino, John Walsh, Antonio Ramirez, the first 3.
Give us attention. They give us attention, caucus. Give us attention.
Yes. What do other cities do that we don't do to cause less housing problems and poverty? Well, first of all, some cities in America have real open and fair elections. We don't. Some cities don't raise the minimum wage 47% overnight, but we do. Some cities pave the streets. We don't. Some cities pave alleys. We never do. Yes, some cities listen to their constituents. Ours doesn't. And some cities have utility companies that lower rates when gas prices go down. Ours raises the price of utilities when gas goes down. So that's what the other cities do, and that's why you got the empty chairs facing the empty suits, because you got no solutions. You know the other cities do it right. You know we do it wrong, but you're going to keep doing it wrong. That's why it's so much fun to come here.
Thank you. Stop talking.
Ms. Ramirez, it's you. Your time has started.
Thank you very much. I know that Santa Monica, though they don't want the homeless population coming in from Los Angeles, I've had the pleasure of meeting some very refined officers who were very polite to me when I was there. But one of the places, OPCC and St. Joseph's, they have a team of workers that try to help, first and foremost, the military veterans and get them housed and off the streets. And then what they do is they gather individuals to meet with a social worker there at these St. Joseph's and or PCC and get them housed immediately. I'm not crazy about OPCC because there's a lot of racism in that place, that shelter. But St. Joseph's, you've got a great group of people that do take their homeless people very seriously. Again, St. Joseph's is fantastic. I highly recommend St. Joseph's. Though they don't have showers, they do focus on getting their homeless people housed. God bless them. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Mr. John Walsh. He's not here. General Jeff, you're up. Close us out.
Thank you, committee. General Jeff, Skid Row. I can speak to Santa Monica, what they've done, because a lot of people from Skid Row would actually travel, to Santa Monica for services. And what Santa Monica did was they basically shut their doors down and limited their services to only residents of Santa Monica, which, left a lot of Skid Row out on the cold. But it's understandable. When we talk about best practices, this is an important time for the city of Los Angeles. This is the opportunity for us to get things right. I have a problem with the coordinated entry system and the fact that the city of Los Angeles is actually leaning on something that the city can't even control, the database. And so the best practices are going to be, it's severely flawed. Home for Good created an extensive backlog that we're trying to dig out of a hole. And now they've got CES, which also created a backlog. Multiple backlogs is not the way. So we hope that the city will take the time necessary to get it right. Thank you.
All right, the item's been moved and seconded. If there's no opposition, the item is so ordered. With that, we can adjourn the special meeting of the Homelessness and Poverty Committee. Thank you all so much.